Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, at first it seemed like a normal, perfectly beautiful morning in the bluegrass state, but then everything changed in a matter of moments, as it so often does. The preceding blue cobalt sky showed no signs of abating. It was clear that there was not a fluffy white cloud in sight, as by all accounts it appeared to be a bright sunny day. But in a trice the sky grumbled, like a cantankerous, disagreeable old man. Levi was out in the stables attending to his horses when he looked up in the sky, having heard an inauspicious faint rumbling sound. He was thinking to himself, "That's funny. I could have sworn I heard thunder." He heard the booming sound again. He knew he was definitely not mistaken this time. That was unequivocally thunder. He better get a move on, he thought. He glanced up at the baleful sky again. In a trice it deepened. The silken firmament grew grey. The light dimmed. The threatening thunder grumbled. Then suddenly the sky burst open. It began to pelt down with rain furiously, as if the earth was sobbing her eyes out. No one was more surprised and bewildered than Levi by the sudden deluge, as the weather forecast had predicted no rain. But he was beginning to realize those forecasts were notoriously unreliable. Clearly they couldn't be trusted. This wasn't the first time he'd been caught off guard, nor would it be the last. With no raincoat conveniently on hand to keep him protected from the assailing onslaught, he hurriedly led all 7 of his American quarter black and bay horses into their very elegant, recently renovated stable block that smelt of leather, tack and hay. Levi filled the horses' troughs with food, ensuring that each stable had enough hay for his horses. It was now bucketing down outside. Levi quickly found a plastic bag. He covered his head with the meagre offering, running as fast as he could to the main house, a colonial 3-story minimalistic white emulsion symmetrical home with a grey slate roof, large windows and black shutters. Try as he might, he could not escape the whipping sheets of water that lambasted his whole body with a fierce enthusiasm. Levi bolted through the kitchen door like a bat out of hell, slamming the door quickly behind him as he entered a dry, reassuring world filled with aromatic, sumptuous smells of home cooking, as something richly savoury was bubbling away happily on the pale blue range oven. He looked like a dishevelled, half-drowned wet dog. His clothes clung to him in limp rags, bringing in puddles of water with him that dribbled off him, forming a sizable pool on the floor. He was soaked to the skin, his body completely drenched. Shivering with cold, he began to jump up and down on the spot to keep warm. His wife was in the kitchen attending to the evening meal. Her ample, pear-shaped body, supporting a white pinny around her waist, looked at the sorry sight of her husband, along with the pond of water that had formed over her new recently fitted reclaimed heart-pine floor, with an expression of horror on her face. "Look at you, Levi. You're soaked to the skin. You'll catch your death of cold. Get out of those clothes at once. Go and have a warm shower." Levi didn't need much encouragement. He stripped naked, handing his wife his saturated clothes, which she promptly threw into the drum of the washing machine. The removal of all his clothes had a profound effect on Jumbo, their very large black dog, easily as large as a Great Dane, but covered in lots of curly hair. He looked up at Levi, as if seeing him for the very first time, as Levi minus his clothes was an enigmatic and rather curious sight. Jumbo did not seem to know what to make of Levi's naked form. He'd never been privy to Levi in a state of undress before. He was used to the farmer only wearing jeans and a plaid shirt. He lay there watching him, both black eyes pinned on Levi directly, his ears pinned forward. Levi darted up the staircase to the bathroom. He was gone from his sight. When Amy saw Jumbo's peculiar expression, she secretly wondered what was going through his doggy mind. She was certain Jumbo was thinking that humans could be very strange. She would hasten to agree with that. Amy began to prepare some dumplings to throw on the stew, mixing soot, flour, parsley, eggs, baking powder and water together in a bowl, working the dough vigorously in her hands, moulding them into rounded balls, which she dropped quickly into the beef casserole. She knew a man like Levi, who worked on the farm so hard, required all the calories he could get, as he was slim as the day when they first met. If anything, he may have been slimmer, as she had noticed he was using a higher notch on his belt these days. Levi was one of the lucky ones. She sighed with frustration. It wasn't fair. She only had to look at a carbohydrate, and she'd gained several pounds in a day. But Levi could eat anything he wanted, not even put on an inch. It was utterly sickening. Over the years, Amy had tried every conceivable diet known to man, with little success. She had been on the cabbage soup diet, the baked bean diet, the Atkins diet, intermittent fasting, and so many other fads. Then one day she promptly decided that she would never ever diet again. It had been the best decision she'd ever made in her entire life. The body was remarkably clever. It could figure out the games you played with it. Otherwise the body would never have survived the famines it was subjected to in the days of old. But now famine was not a big problem for Americans, as the food aisles were brimming with so many phenomenal food choices that had left many battling their waistlines. Amy was not into fast food. She staunchly believed in good home cooking. She had raised her family of 4 on very wholesome diet, stocking her pantries full of homemade tin food. But now her 2 children had long since left home, so it was just Levi and her against the world together. They made a formidable team. It certainly helped that they were the best of friends. Amy, now in her 60s, had decided enough was enough. She was going to put her foot down. Life was far too short to get into a frenzy over her weight. So she had tried to just eat normally. And something quite remarkable had happened. She had dropped pounds without even trying. How did that happen? Maybe choosing not to worry about her weight so much had meant her preoccupation with food had declined. There were times when she was on the Atkins diet that she would wake up dreaming of chocolate cake, but not any more. If she wanted chocolate cake now, she'd have a little. Now she denied herself nothing. She was actually losing weight. Levi sighed with relief as the hot water of the shower vanquished the chills that consumed his body. He lathered himself rigorously with soap, his thoughts focusing back to earlier on in the day, when the images of the grey horse's face kept reappearing in his mind. For the first time in his entire life, something quite extraordinary had happened, something he couldn't explain, nor could he fathom. But then maybe some things could never be explained. They just were what they were. It was as simple as that. Levi had been a farmer all his life, working with cows and horses, never knowing a life beyond his life on the farm, nor would he want to. Levi had no secret hankerings or envious associations for living in a large city with its fast pace of living. He couldn't fathom how people could race around like that all the time. He was raised in this old colonial farmhouse that had once belonged to his parents, who were now both deceased. His thoughts wafted back like the fluffy white clouds floating across a blue sky. They were lingering and procrastinating over the grey horse he had seen this morning. He still couldn't get his head around what the fortuitous event had actually meant, as it had done a 180 on him, which was an awful pity. There had been an advertisement online for a few horses for sale, so he'd decided to take a look. Why not? He didn't know why. It was like an inward predestined nudge or a touch of divine providence that had told him to take a look. On an impulsive, unsolicited, impromptu whim, he jumped into his truck, hastily driving the 45-minute journey to the farm, where he'd subsequently been directed by the very helpful farmhand to the field, where 7 magnificent young horses were frolicking away happily, of which only one was a grey. He'd been informed that these were the horses that had been advertised for sale. Mrs. Maggie Fielding, the woman selling the horses, was an ex-rider whom had been told by her doctor to give up her huge passion due to excruciating back injuries caused by a dreadful road traffic accident where she'd been flung out of her truck. It was a miracle, quite frankly, that she was alive. Her one big mistake was not wearing a safety belt. She'd been managing her condition with pain meds, but when the pain meds had alleviated her pain, she would go riding again, exposing her back to even more damage. How I'd love to keep the horses, she had told Levi. But if I have that temptation of the horses in my yard, I won't be able to trust myself. I know I'll ride them again. I won't be able to help myself. I have to remove the temptation from my life. Levi could feel the woman's pain. He knew selling the horses for her was one of the hardest decisions to have to make. He couldn't envisage what it was like to be thrown a curveball like that by her medical consultant, being advised and forewarned that she could never ride again. That was when Levi saw the striking dappled grey mare in the meadow. She was so beautiful, majestic, magnificent in every way, with a grace that was beguiling. "Oh, that's our young horse, Silver Birch," Maggie told him. "She's a very particular horse, not usually partial to strangers. But for some bizarre, curious reason, she's making a beeline directly for you." Indeed, it was uncannily true. The grey mare had looked up in Levi's direction. It was as if recognition, a sense of knowing, had come upon her. She quickened her pace as she trotted over to the fence, her focus directed on Levi, as if she was greeting a long-lost friend, whom was very dear to her, whom she recognised. Then something quite extraordinary happened. The grey mare affectionately nuzzled Eli with her nose, breathing in his scent, as if it was exceedingly familiar to her, as seasoned as the green grass that graced the meadow, or the oats in her food trough that she was rather partial to enjoying at feeding time. In that moment, something extraordinary transpired between Levi and the mare. They locked eyes together. Levi felt such a deep spiritual connection with the mare, as if somewhere, maybe in another lifetime, they'd known each other before. He knew the mare felt it too. It was a soul interaction that could not be described, almost like two minded beings coming together. It was out of this world. Maggie audibly gasped, "Oh my God, I don't know how to say this, but Silver Birch absolutely adores you. It's like she's known you before. I've never seen an interaction like this before." The tears came into her eyes. She was visibly moved. Levi began to stroke Silver Birch's mane lovingly, while the mare stared at Levi adoringly. Levi knew he had to purchase this horse, but the owner looked at him very sadly. "I feel dreadful. In my opinion, you're meant to own Silver Birch. There's no doubt about that in my mind. But would you believe it? Out of all the 7 horses, Silver Birch has been promised to another farmer. She's already sold. The others are available for purchase." Levi's heart plummeted like a heavy stone flung into the depths of a huge body of water. "But I don't want any other horse. Don't get me wrong, Maggie. Your horses are fine specimens. They really are. But Silver Birch is the one I want." "Who have you sold her to?" he asked. "Farmer Ron Wilson from Blue Acres Farm. Do you know him?" "No, I don't." "I really think you should contact him. You really must. You're meant to have Silver Birch. I know you are. You need to give him a call," she said, handing me his number. "Good luck. I'm afraid you're going to need it. I hate to have to tell you this, but Farmer Ron is not a very agreeable character. He's known for being very crotchety, somewhat uninhibited in his offensive language, if you know what I mean. He does tend to drop a plethora of F-bombs. Levi had subsequently contacted Ron Wilson, offering him double the amount of money for the horse, because he knew that he just must have Silver Birch. "Hello," came Ron's voice at the end of the line that sounded like a peevish bark. Indeed, his abrupt, peaked tone had been so insolent and rude that Levi had been tempted to quickly slam down the phone. But he knew the significance of this phone call. It was too great to do such an impulsive, short-sighted thing. He'd have to make this farmer amenable to him in selling him Silver Birch. "Hello, is that Farmer Ron?" Farmer Ron sounded irritated, as if he had a very short fuse. "Speaking," came the raspy, disgruntled voice. "Who's this?" he almost growled. "You don't know me. My name is Levi Sawyer. I'm phoning you in regards to the horse you're purchasing from Maggie Wiseman." "Yes," said the voice. "What about the bloody horse?" "Well, look, I don't know how to explain this." "Well, get on with it, then. I haven't got all day. What's your bloody problem? Lost your tongue, have you? I tell you, I ain't got all day."
Levi was so shocked he almost stumbled awkwardly on his words. He was taken off guard by the fractious, ill-tempered manner of the farmer.
"I wouldn't be phoning you out of the blue like this, but I've worked with animals all my life. But you see, when I met Silverbirch, there was an incredible connection between us. Even Maggie noticed it, commented about it. I really feel I'm meant to own Silverbirch. We belong together. Maggie gave me your phone number. I would like to offer you double the amount for the horse, double what you paid for it. I would really like to own her."
"Tough titty!" Mate came the acrimonious, captious, mean voice at the end of the line.
"You've got a bloody awful cheek, phoning me like this. I paid for Silverbirch fair and square. I'm not selling her, so get your sorry ass off my business. Leave me the F alone," he said, slamming the phone down on Levi without a bye or leave. Rude, obnoxious bastard, thought Levi, tapping the farmer's number into his cell again, pressing redial. He wasn't prepared to give up on Silverbirch without a fight, but the way things were going, they didn't look promising at all. "Get your big fat butt off my phone," yelled Ron's waspish voice again. "I told you I'm not interested in selling you the damn horse, so stop bugging the hell out of me. What's your problem, mate? Got brain damage, have you? Don't you know what no means? It means no." "But, mister—" "Forget it. I'm not interested. The horse is mine. Get over it, you loser."
Levi dried his wet, steamy body with a large, white, fluffy bath sheet, reflecting on the farmer's pugnacious, antagonistic attitude towards him. His heart sank with resigned acceptance. Sometimes in life you had to make do with what fate threw in your direction. You had to accept the cards you were dealt. You had to get on with your life. Yet deep down in his heart, Farmer Levi absolutely knew he was meant to own Silverbirch. But how could he ever make that happen? It would seem that Farmer Ron was impenetrable and unyielding, rather like the Berlin Wall when it was up. He sighed in frustration, throwing on a comfortable pair of joggers and a sweater, trotting down the long wooden sweeping staircase to the snug, cosy farmhouse kitchen, where his wife was ladling out large portions of stew and dumplings. He could see the steam rising from the casserole dish, where tender pieces of juicy meat, vegetables, and puffy light dumplings, caressed in a rich red wine gravy, along with piping hot mashed potatoes, was being served. Levi began to realize how hungry he was. His stomach was growling.
"Something smells very delicious,"
he said, sitting down at the large oakwood kitchen table, eagerly tucking into the scrumptious meal. The meal tasted incredible. The meat melted in his mouth. He glanced out of the window briefly as he was eating. It was still overcast outside. Rain was pelting down. The views of the viridescent green countryside smiled back at him, as every blade of grass in the meadow and every tree twinkled and gleamed, shining under the opaque spray of raindrops, while the earth smelt fragrantly fresh. "You look very distracted, dear," said Amy. "It's not like you to be so preoccupied." Even though Levi was a man of few words, she was right. It was unlike him to be so distracted, or caught up in a world all of his own, so his wife knew something was wrong. Levi told her about his encounter with Silverbirch. "I can't explain it. I've never experienced anything like this before. It was like we both connected, on every level, as if I had known her in another lifetime. I know she felt it too. The only way I can explain the feeling to you is when you've loved and lost an animal that you are really, really devoted to. Then suddenly there they are again, larger than life, rebirthed into your reality. It felt like that, almost like we were being reunited again." "That's extraordinary," said Amy. "You were clearly meant to have that horse. But I don't understand why that farmer wouldn't sell her to you. How mean of him, when you offered him double. You explained the connection you had with Silverbirch, didn't you?" "Of course I did. But he wasn't budging. Actually, he was very rude." "What was his name?" asked Amy. "Maybe I know him." "Ron Wilson," Levi told her. "He lives on a farm just around the corner from here." Amy almost choked on the dumpling she was eating. Her face went as pale as paper. "Did you say Farmer Ron Wilson?"
Levi nodded.
Do you know him?
Know him, said Amy. Of course I know him. Would you believe my sister Judith dated him for a while? Let's just say it didn't go so well. Levi raised a questionable eyebrow.
What's that supposed to mean?
It means that Farmer Ron Wilson is not a nice man. If he was abrupt with you on the phone, it's only because he's always like that. He's one of the rudest, discourteous, impudent and audacious people I've ever had the pleasure to meet. I can't for the life of me fathom what Judith ever saw in him. Do you know he locked her up in his closet once? Now my sister was scared out of her skin. She was terrified of the dark, so she came home in a dreadful state. I always say it was a good thing he did that to her. It opened her eyes to what an obnoxious, unchivalrous character he actually was.
You're joking, said Levi. That is shocking. How old was she when she was dating him?
Probably about 20. I'm glad to say my father did manage to persuade Judith to end that relationship. The man was a big bully. I remember Judith inviting him over to visit the family for dinner. The first thing he said to my mother was that she was older and fatter than he'd envisaged. He was heartily glad that Judith took after her father genetically. He wasn't partial to big women. Imagine saying that to someone you've just met, who you need to impress.
Well, what did your mother say about that?
She said she wasn't partial either to rude, young, insolent men. But it didn't stop there. Ron was 22 at the time. He was one of those men that had an opinion about absolutely everything. He wasn't afraid to tell you exactly what he thought, even if it caused offence. My mother's meal, for example, was all right, but if it was him, he would have added garlic, some fresh parsley to the gravy, and not so much butter to the carrots. So I take it your parents didn't like him. Not at all, but Judith was going through a rebellious time in her life, so I think she secretly admired the dismissive, contemptible way Ron spoke to our parents, but then she got sucked in by him. For a long time he robbed her of all her self-esteem. You mark my words, the very fact you wanted silver birch for yourself made Ron all the more less likely to sell her to you. The man really gets off upsetting other people. I think he's so miserable with his lot in life that if he can spread out the misery a bit, it makes him feel infinitely better about himself. What's the age-old saying? Misery loves company. In the weeks and months that followed on the farm, Levi was unable to shake off the memories of his encounter with silver birch. Sometimes he would wake up in a hot sweat. He dreamed of the dappled grey horse galloping towards him in his dreams, her dark, sad eyes pleading him. He could swear she was calling his name in the dream. "Ron, please help me." He couldn't shake off the feeling that silver birch was in trouble. He kept having the same nightmare over and over again. Levi had never been the kind of person that remembered his dreams, but sometimes he'd wake up in a cold sweat, as deep in his gut an ominous feeling overcame him. And it was always connected to silver birch. It made absolutely no sense at all. Why was he having these irrational, unexplainable, incongruous nightmares about silver birch? Why did silver birch seem to be pleading so desperately and frantically for his help? He decided to talk to his daughter, who now lived in Boston, about it, run it by her. After all, she was a psychologist. She understood this kind of thing. Levi and Amy had 2 children who had not followed their parents into farming, but had both branched surprisingly into medical careers. His son Melvin was a radiographer, his daughter Janine a psychologist. They both now worked and lived in Boston. Levi told Janine on the phone all about what had happened to him when he first encountered silver birch. "It was like I'd known her all my life. I can't get her out of my mind." Interesting. I know a woman who does past life regression, actually. She swears that people have lived hundreds and thousands of lifetimes. If she was to hear your story, she would certainly say that you have known silver birch in a previous lifetime. Personally, I don't believe in reincarnation, but clearly you have an extraordinary connection with that horse for some reason. It's a bummer that the farmer didn't want to sell her to you. Not a nice man, by all accounts. Well, what about the dream, Janine? You're a psychologist. Do you place any weight on dreams? I just wake up in a cold sweat. In my nightmare, silver birch is calling for my help. I sense silver birch is in grievous trouble. Very interesting, Dad. The mind's an extraordinary thing, you know. There are things about it that haven't been fathomed yet in science. Many psychologists are highly dismissive about clairvoyance, but I'm very open to it. Meaning what exactly? Meaning you may genuinely sense something is terribly wrong with silver birch. It could be true. The general consensus of opinion, though, or let's just say the Freudian theory of dreams, is that they reveal hidden desires and yearnings, which in your case would be self-explanatory, hence make a great deal of sense, as you really want to own silver birch, don't you? So your dream is reflecting that longing.
Makes sense, I suppose, said Levi. It also makes me feel a lot better. I don't think I've ever wanted to own an animal as much as I want to own her. I can't stop thinking about her.
There you are then, Dad. There's your answer. So tell me, how are things going on at the farm? How's Mum doing?
Your mum's doing very well, cooking up a storm every night, even though you've long since left home. The farmhouse still smells of delicious food every single day. I'm a very lucky man.
Well, I hope she's abandoned those crazy diets. I remember her going through one diet after another. She'd get so desperately miserable. Not a way to live, Dad.
Your mum is eating normally now. And believe it or not, she's losing weight.
I'm glad to hear about that. Good on her. Any other news? How's Jumbo?
Jumbo's very well. He's getting old now, so sleeps a lot, but nothing changes. He loves the farm. There's something else I've been meaning to tell you, Janine.
Yes? Now you've got me intrigued. Why, I do believe I detect excitement in your voice.
Well, remember when you were young, you used to go on and on about a Bigfoot?
Oh, yes. I'm sorry, Dad, I don't care what anybody says, or whoever ridicules me in the process, but I believe those creatures are definitely real. I know there isn't any strong evidence, but I have a gut feeling about it.
I'm beginning to agree with you, Janine. I know I was dismissive before, but I've changed my mind. I've been finding large 20-inch footprints around the yard of late. I have no explanation for them whatsoever.
You what? Are you being serious, Dad? That's absolutely incredible.
It is, isn't it? Now, they're definitely humanoid prints. I can see the toe-like indentations, so unless someone is playing a hoax on me, they could not belong to anything other than a Bigfoot. There's no way they belong to a bear.
There's no way that's a hoax, Dad. Who would deliberately come onto your land and start making Bigfoot imprints as a joke? That's more than a little unlikely. I hope, Dad, that you were sagacious enough to make some plaster casts of those imprints, because I'll have you know I'm going to want to see them when I visit the both of you next month with Matthew and the kids.
Well, I'm glad you're visiting soon. You'll be pleased to know that I've made excellent plaster casts. You would be proud of me. Your mother is most impressed.
Well, keep your eyes pinned, Dad. See if you can see anything on the farm. Make sure you keep your camera out. You've clearly got a Bigfoot on the land. He must be coming from the woods. He's obviously getting quite bold. I wonder why.
My thinking exactly. We've had a fair bit of rain on the farm recently, which is why I was able to collect such sizable prints. The indentations in the ground were magnificent, perfect for throwing a cast.
That's amazing, Dad. Look, I've got to go. We'll speak to you soon. Send my love to Mum, won't you? And, of course, to Jumbo and all the horses.
Will do,
said Levi, putting down the phone, feeling heartily happy to have spoken to his daughter, who suspected his dreams were borne about by his profound, impassioned desire to own silver birch. How he wished he could get that horse out of his head. As Levi climbed into bed that evening next to his wife Amy, no sooner had he hit the pillow, he was out like a light. It was later on in the evening he woke up in a fitful, sporadic sleep, as his bed sheets were drenched again with sweat. If he was a woman, he would think he was going through the change of life. But this was something altogether different. Once again he'd been having a compelling dream about silver birch. The horse's pleas for help were getting even more critically urgent. To Levi it felt so real. He got out of bed, running his hands across his forehead, observing the beads of perspiration on his hands. My God, he thought, what the heck is happening to me? He scrambled out of bed and advanced towards the sink in the ensuite bathroom to splash his hot face with refreshing ice-cold water. Ah, that was so much better. The cool water was reviving and cooling. Now that he was up, he felt restless, so he trotted down the sweeping staircase towards the kitchen, pulling out a carton of milk from the refrigerator, pouring himself a glass of the milky beverage. It was soothing and cooling, just exactly what he needed. To his amazement, Jumbo was at the kitchen door, scratching it with his paws, his ears pinned forward, making a whining sound.
"Something up, boy?" asked Eli. "Is something out there, Jumbo?"
Jumbo didn't normally behave like this, so Eli pushed past the elderly dog. With his headlamp on his head and his rifle in his hands, he'd ventured out of doors. and that was when he heard a clanging noise. As he ventured out of the kitchen door, that was when he heard a distant clanging noise. As he scurried past the barn, he heard it even louder and more clearer. It was a clattering, clanging and banging noise that sounded distinctly like a bin lid being thrown across the ground very loudly. Then he spotted 2 cheeky raccoons racing out of the open barn door, eyeing him mischievously through their dark eyes. Damn, he thought, I must have left the barn door open. The raccoons had got into the feeding barrels again. Then he heard another noise. He stopped dead in his tracks, for he saw a sight so bizarre he thought he must be dreaming. For a moment he rubbed his eyes extra hard to make absolutely certain he wasn't. Standing there in the courtyard outside the horse's stable was a Bigfoot, and on either side of him were 2 grey horses, so emaciated and thin it was a wonder they weren't actually dead, for they were skeletal, with bones jutting out of their skin. To his amazement, the Bigfoot was feeding the 2 starved horses with a little food from his barn. He knew now it wasn't him that had left the barn door open. It was the Bigfoot that had done that. The anomalous creature was speaking to the horses in an articulate language, words that Eli could not understand or comprehend. Whatever the Bigfoot was saying, he was reassuring the horses, stroking them gently with a tender, loving touch. It was only then that the Bigfoot looked up in Levi's direction. As he'd been so absorbed in helping the horses, he hadn't even realized that Levi was actually there. For a long moment, Levi and the Bigfoot locked eyes together. Levi had never seen such kind eyes in all his life. He realized that whoever these horses were, the Bigfoot had brought them over to his farmhouse. But the horses were so incredibly weak, there was no way they could have walked there on their own. Had the Bigfoot carried them, one at a time, to his house, he wondered? He couldn't answer this mystifying question, but it was the only conclusion he could reach. Levi possibly should have been afraid of the intimidating Bigfoot that stood up on 2 legs at easily over 10 foot tall and 1,000 pounds, 4 foot wide across the shoulder area, incredibly strong and powerful. So this was the owner of the large footprints he had seen around the yard, Levi thought. What he had never anticipated was how remarkably human the face appeared. In what he would describe as almost certainly a Cherokee Indian-like appearance, with high, very defined cheekbones, a bent, very flat nose, almond-shaped, heavy, deep-set hooded eyes, along with a sloped forehead that was deeply furrowed with wrinkles. The Bigfoot pointed directly at the 2 grey mares, looking directly into Levi's eyes. He heard the words in his head, "Please, please, help them." Levi watched in amazement as the Bigfoot stroked the 2 creatures again. Then he glided away. Levi watched the Bigfoot moving over his meadow, jumping over his fence with the agility of a horse, and then almost floating away as he moved through the wooded area that consisted of red maples and oak trees. Levi turned his attention towards the horses. Then one of the horses looked up directly at him, with dark, sad, languished eyes. Then those sad, melancholy eyes glimmered with a renewed hope. They recognized Levi. The depressed horse's mood lifted at once. Levi realized to his horror and astonishment that one of the starving, malnourished horses was no other than Silver Birch. He threw his arms around the pensive horse, sobbing like he'd never sobbed before, his tears soaking the horse's out-of-condition coat. "How could Farmer Ron do this to you? What kind of a monster is he? Don't you worry, we'll get you better, I promise you that." Despite Silver Birch's dreadful emaciated state and poor condition, Silver Birch knew instinctively she was in very good hands. Her pragmatic, efficacious and optimistic positive energy rubbed off considerably on the other horse, so both horses seemed to sense that they had been saved, that the future was brimming with bright new possibilities, open meadows, good pasture, fresh water, and copious amounts of love. The horses could perceive it all. Levi called the vet, who arrived the following morning to examine the 2 emaciated horses. He was mortified to see their appalling condition, expressing his amazement that they weren't already dead. "You need to feed them high-calorie foods," he told Levi. "Lots of alpha sprouts, beet pulp should be added to the feeding grain, along with some peanut or canola oil to aid digestion, to help with weight gain. But you need to feed the horses little and often. It's very dangerous to give them large amounts of food when they've been starving. Also give them some light exercise and lots of love to improve their condition." Levi immediately phoned Animal Welfare to report that there was a suspicion that Farmer Ron Wilson might be starving his animals. What the authorities found out defied belief. But then, as Animal Welfare will tell you, there are some people that should never ever own animals. They were to describe it as one of the worst cases of animal cruelty they'd ever seen. But luckily the vast majority of cows, horses and dogs were rescued in time to be brought back from the brink of death to abundant health. Unfortunately, on Ron's farm, the barns were full of horse animal feed and hay that had barely been touched. But the animals were all starving, with gnarled bones sticking through their skin that was so pronounced. It was like the skin was covering a mere skeleton. Worse still, there were water troughs that were empty, devoid of any drinking water. And then in the fields, the telling carcasses of animals who had not been so lucky protruded through the long grass. Even Ron's house was a sight for very sore eyes. His half-starved wife was found locked in one of the bedrooms in the house, looking so thin and emaciated herself. One of the police officers actually mistook her for a child. The house smelt rancid and unkept, with mice scurrying around the place and maggots wiggling around open tins of spaghetti on the kitchen counter. The most telling sign of all was finished bottles of whiskey and brandy lying scattered all over the house, along with a plethora of beer cans. So while Ron was getting seriously drunk, the animals in the fields were dying of willful neglect, not borne about by financial hardship or struggle, but by blatant apathy, indifference, cruelty, and plain laziness. When Ron was arrested, he began to kick and scream at the top of his lungs, spitting in the officers' faces. But thankfully, given that he had starved his wife purposefully, he was charged with attempted murder and was immediately incarcerated, while all the animals were rescued and rehabilitated, all fortunate enough to find extra loving homes. Levi chose to adopt 2 of the half-starved Schnauzer dogs to also be companions for Jumbo while he remained alive. It took many months for Silver Birch and the other mare Orchard Queen, along with the 2 adorable Schnauzers Ruby and Fido, to recover fully from being almost starved to the brink of death. But the great news is they made a full, buoyant and robust recovery. Levi owes the successful rehabilitation of these 2 mares to a Bigfoot's desire to literally reach out and help, being an eyewitness to the cruel, obscene suffering of the animals. Levi has occasionally seen over the years, after a spate of rainfall on the farm, the telltale sign of a Bigfoot footprints in the mud. He's absolutely certain that the Bigfoot is checking in on the horses to see that they're all right. Silver Birch and Levi are now inseparable. They can be seen happily riding across the countryside, with an unfathomable bond that cannot be explained. As for Ron's abused wife, who would have ever foreseen that of all the places in the world that she would move to, it would be Boston? Imagine Levi's surprise when he learnt it was his daughter Janine who was counselling the poor woman, who is now making steady progress on her ongoing recovery. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. Jeanette flicked through the white diary of her appointment book. It looked to be a hectically busy day as usual in her hair studio in Seattle. It was chock-a-block full. "Oh, I'm so sorry," she said, looking at the eager, hopeful young woman standing behind the reception counter. "I don't have any spare slots today, I'm afraid, but I could fit you in tomorrow at 10 if you like. It's the best I can do." "That'll be fine," said the young woman, looking very impressed. "Are you always this busy?" Jeanette sighed. "Oh, I'm afraid so. Gone are the days we can hang around hoping for a client to drop in. Now we're always hectically rushed off our feet, burning the candle at both ends." "You sound as if you wish that weren't the case," said the young lady, looking bewildered. "Most people would kill to be that busy, surely." Jeanette paused for a moment. "Oh, don't get me wrong. I appreciate being rushed off my feet, I really do. But sometimes I just wish I could breathe. You know, take a long break." "Oh, I do understand what you mean," said the woman. Jeanette was about to take the young woman's details in her appointment book when the phone rang. "Do you mind if I take this for a moment?" she said. "I won't be long." No, please go ahead." "Hello, Epiphanies, can I help you?" "Oh, I am so sorry to hear that, Joyce. I hope you're feeling better soon. Well, make sure you keep yourself lovely and warm. Honey and lemon is the idea." "Yes. Well, I'll see you next week then. Bye, dear. Take care." Jeanette looked at the young lady. "It's your lucky day today. You go and take a seat over there. I've just had a cancellation this very minute from a sick client of mine." "Are you sure?"
said the young woman, her face lighting up like a Christmas tree. "I mean, you were saying you needed some free time." "Oh, I'm sure," said Jeanette. "I'd be delighted to do your hair for you." Jeanette had been running her illustrious, well-established hair salon in Seattle for over 10 long years. She had wanted to be a professional hairdresser since she was a little girl, as she adored playing with people's hair. Even when she was little, she'd stand on a stool in the living room behind the large upholstered chair where her father would regularly sit reading a novel. She would twist, braid, and pull her father's hair while he continued to read. It would seem her father enjoyed having his hair played with, claiming it was like having a relaxing, somewhat vigorous head massage. Sometimes her father would discover that his short brown hair had become a mass of thousands of tiny braids. One day he slept in those braids, and when he pulled them out the following morning, his hair looked so crinkled, but in a strange way it rather suited him. After her beloved father had died prematurely from a heart attack, something that had ripped the floor out of Jeanette's world, tearing her life apart into thousands of pieces, like a displaced, warped jigsaw puzzle that was impossible to bring back together. Growing up with a single dad was all she'd ever known, as her mother never wanted to be involved in her life. When Jeanette was 2 years old, her mother had willfully abandoned the two of them, claiming she didn't want to be burdened with responsibilities. Jeanette's father had left her a sizable inheritance, and in honour of her father she'd started up her own hair salon. She now had 10 busy hairdressers working in the salon, which was a pristine square shape with white-tiled floors, soft pink Martian walls, fluffy pink towels and a pink awning outside the hair studio. In the beginning, as with any new business, times had been exceedingly hard. At one time she was almost certain she'd have to close her doors, throw in the trowel and give up on her dream. And then voila, within weeks her hairdresser was doing a booming trade. One thing Jeanette had not been prepared for was just how incredibly exhausting her job would invariably become. She knew sooner or later she'd need to take some valuable time off. After all, she reminded herself, I don't live to work, I work to live. So what are we going to do for you today? She asked the young woman. My name's Alice, she said. Well, what are we going to do for you today, Alice? Jeanette pulled away her blonde hair, lifting it up in her hands. Your hair is too long for your face, she said. You've got a really cute little pixie face, and a short cut would really show it off beautifully in my opinion. You know what? You're drowned by your hair. You should show your face off more. Go for it, said Alice. You seem to know what you're doing. I also fancy a change. Are you sure about that? People can get very attached to long hair, you know. I'm very sure. I trust you. Jeanette got to work with her scissors while Alice was busying herself on her cell phone. Damn, she said as she looked at the phone. Everything all right? Asked Jeanette. Not really, said the young woman. I've only just got a cancellation on the cottage. I was looking forward to the cash it would bring in for me. I let it out, you see. Oh, I see. A nice little money earner for you, is it? Well, whereabouts is this cottage of yours? Asked Jeanette, in a nonchalant way, as she continued to manoeuvre her dexterous hands skillfully through blonde hair, as large chunks of it fell haphazardly onto the white-tiled floor. It's about an hour and a half's drive out of Seattle, not too far from here. You should give me your details. When I finally get a chance to let my hair down, I wouldn't mind a little break in the country. It would do me good. I'm not sure this would be your thing. The cottage is haunted. Jeanette immediately stopped cutting Alice's hair. She could feel her heart pounding with excitement. She was fascinated with all things paranormal. After her father's death, Jeanette wanted to believe with all her heart that this was not all there was, so her interest in the world of ghosts and disembodied voices had increased exponentially. For her it was almost verification, if you like, that the soul never dies, which would mean one day she would definitely be reunited with her father. Haunted, did you say? That's right. But how do you know it's haunted? Because I've stayed there and seen things. Other people who've stayed there have seen things too. That's why I got the idea to let it out to ghost enthusiasts and paranormal researchers. They're always satisfied when they stay there. The two girls who were booking the place for the weekend are very big ghost enthusiasts. They're eager to stay at the cottage. They wanted to take some video footage, but they've cancelled. Yes, they've cancelled. A real bummer. Apparently one of the girls has taken ill. Well, I'll take it then, said Jeanette, for the weekend. This time Alice looked rather bewildered. But you're busy. You'll run off your feet here at the salon. I don't care. I'll make a plan. I really could do with a weekend's break. You don't mind staying in a haunted place? Are you kidding? That's the reason I'm renting your cottage from you. Well, what do you think? Asked Jeanette, swivelling around the chair, showing Alice her zooty new haircut. The girl gasped. Oh my God, it's gorgeous. I love it. Oh my word, I never imagined I'd look this good with short hair. It looks amazing. I knew you'd like it, said Jeanette, looking pleased. Did I not say you would look fabulous with short hair? It shows off your cute little face. Alice opened her purse and handed Jeanette some keys and a map. These are for the cottage, she explained. I do hope you have a good time. I hope you know what you're getting into. It was early on a Saturday morning that Jeanette and her boyfriend Steve got into the truck to drive to Alice's cottage. Jeanette decided to say nothing to her boyfriend about the cottage being potentially haunted, as Steve did not believe in the paranormal. He was a huge cynic about things that go bump in the night. So Jeanette decided against telling him that the cottage was often let out to ghost enthusiasts and paranormal researchers, as she was certain such a revelation would go down like a lead balloon with her boyfriend, and invite a lot of scathing, sarcastic commentary and criticism. The best way to deal with a hardened cynic, she told herself, is to bring him into the eye of the storm, to say absolutely nothing. Jeanette had been going out with Steve on and off for over 8 years now. Theirs had been a rocky, tumultuous and turbulent relationship that, much like the Titanic, seemed to keep hitting icebergs, throwing them through bad, slippery patches which would cause them to part their ways. And then, for some bizarre, incredulous reason, they'd end up making up again. Jeanette believed if she and Steve ever tied the knot permanently, they would be divorced within the first year. For while she loved Steve, stability and security were not words that were ingratiated with their relationship long term. Steve was certainly not the man she'd end up marrying. She knew that in her heart, but he was still one of her very best friends, and she did love him dearly. Jeanette herself would not describe herself as a believer in ghosts, but put it this way, she wanted to believe. She seriously hoped that this weekend she'd get to see something. But the tragic thing about life that she knew only too well is that there are no guarantees in anything. It had been difficult at the last minute to find a hairdresser to replace her hair appointments at the salon for Saturday's bookings, but somehow, against all odds, she managed to find a fill-in replacement for her. She reflected about the serendipitous, fortuitous events that had transpired so seamlessly to enable her to spend the weekend at Alice's cottage. It hadn't come cheap, even with the 20% discount, so she certainly hoped it would be a weekend that they would not forget in a hurry. But she need not have worried about that, for this weekend would leave an eternal, indelible mark on her life that would never ever be erased, and would leave a lasting impression. "So where's this place?" asked Steve, as they began to drive down some rural country roads, while his GPS had developed a mind all of its own. It wasn't operating properly. It kept making a strange whirling sound. So Jeanette pulled up the map and instructed Steve exactly where to go. "I think you go right down this road, that's right, and then a swift left, and then we can look for a sign that reads Fairweather Farm. We drive through the farm gates. There's a separate cobbled road that leads to Wisteria Cottage. That's where we're going." "Righty-o," said Steve. The truck wobbled down the rough roads, causing it to jolt so precariously, so that Jeanette felt as if she was sitting on a dodgy fairground ride. The truck's thick rubber tyres lifted up large sheets of fine sand, like an earthen sandstorm, while tiny little pebbles began bouncing up into the air and splashing against the truck with these little pinging sounds. The relatively high embankments on both sides of the road consisted of short stretches of long grassy turf strewn with rocky outcrops that branched out into segregated flowery meadows pinned in by white picket fencing, one where black and white dappled cows were grazing happily, and the other where bay and black horses were seen frolicking. There were bright green ponderosa pines and Douglas firs scattered liberally across the landscape, while in the furthest distance you could see the rise and fall of the mountains. Their sturdy, solid forms seemed so ethereal and light, as if their silhouettes had been painted onto the landscape by an artist's brush in soft blues, pinks and purples, while the sky on this perfect day was the most delightful shade of blue, without a white, fluffy single cloud in sight. But then let's not kid. In this part of the world the weather was as fickle as a cheating partner, so even if the weather looked promising, it was notoriously unreliable. Jeanette had learnt this over the years, never to get her hopes up, as it could always change in a heartbeat. "Oh, here we are," she said. "This must be the farm, which is not connected to the cottage at all. They're separate properties, you see. Fairweather Farm had a large wooden creosoted brown gate, which was left wide open. They drove down a large asphalt road that had been recently paved and was pleasantly smooth under the wheels, and then they came to a cobbled road that veered off the main road with an arrow and sign which read Wisteria Cottage. "This must be it," said Steve, as they drove down a little road that finally led to the cottage. Jeanette held her breath, bracing herself for what they would see, as Alice had not been forthcoming about the condition of the cottage, and in her exuberance to book the haunted place, she had failed to ask about the most basic amenities the place actually offered. "Bloody hell," said Steve as he took one look at the cottage. "Did you see a brochure before you booked the place? It looks positively creepy." Jeanette smiled inwardly at Steve's startled reaction to the weekend rental, a private joke she wasn't going to share with him. By all accounts, he was absolutely right. There was something evocatively airy about the cottage that gave you a tingling, uneasy feeling, as if you were definitely being watched before you even entered the premises. This is what Jeanette had been hoping for, but the disquieted, fraught feeling the cottage exuded did cause her hair to stand on edge ever so slightly. "Well, we better make the most of it then, shall we?" said Jeanette. "We're here for the weekend, so we must enjoy ourselves. It's not often I get time off work, Steve." "You're right. The big plus is the countryside around here is breathtakingly beautiful." That certainly was one redeeming aspect to the somewhat uncongenial cottage that appeared almost hostile and unfriendly, as if someone or something was not altogether happy with the couple's fortuitous, unforeseen arrival. The cottage foundation seemed to melt into the flowering meadow with a seamless grace like white chocolate, as if it had always belonged to the landscape forever. The meadow merged into the field of sagebrush that was heavily flanked by an evergreen wooded area. "I'm looking forward to enjoying a walk in the woods," said Steve. "I can't remember the last time I've been into a woods." Jeanette opened the trunk. The couple brought out their overnight bags, along with their groceries, for the weekend in the cottage. Jeanette was pleasantly pleased to see that the cottage from the inside was well presented. The rooms blended seamlessly into each other. There were generous open marble fireplaces both in the living room area and the main bedroom. A delightful country kitchen fitted with soapstone countertops and backsplashes. There was a sizable Frankie stainless steel sink, with a zooty state-of-the-art tap. All of this was set off by very stylish-looking cream cabinetry, the pièce de résistance being a huge dark green range oven. Who would have thought that a haunted location like this would be made so sumptuously cosy? The sweeping oakwood staircase led to the upstairs bedrooms. They were well fitted with large queen-sized beds, with soft, comfortable linens, Egyptian cottons and bright, colourful scatter cushions, along with elegant furnishings, while the smooth off-white walls were carefully strewn with selective abstract art pieces, along with a series of bright, cheerful-looking Picasso prints. Steve sighed with relief after he started unloading the groceries into the refrigerator. "Thank God this place isn't so menacing on the inside. It's actually quite cosy in here. I think we're going to enjoy ourselves very much." Before long, Jeanette and Steve settled into the cottage. Jeanette secretly began to feel a slight tingle of disappointment. The normality of everything, the smooth flow of the unpacking, the stocking of the fridge, the going for a brief walk outside, made her seriously begin to doubt that this was a haunted location at all. Her first impressions of the place being sinister had all but dissipated. But then, in truth, what was she expecting? Ghosts to come crawling out of the ceiling like spiders hanging on their ethereal silken webs? It didn't work like that. She began to secretly ponder whether Alice had made the entire thing up about the cottage being haunted, hyped everything up. A clever, intoxicating Machiavellian ruse, so that she'd bite the bait, be reeled in like a fish at the end of a line, and then book the cottage. It would make shrewd business sense, wouldn't it, to be as cunning as that? But then that couldn't be right, could it? Alice didn't know Jeanette was interested in ghosts. On the contrary, Jeanette had not even shared this secret fascination with anyone, so that didn't make any sense at all. The good news, though, was when she returned from a walk with Steve, one glance at the outside of the cottage, the tangled wisteria, the dark tenebrous windows, the portentous grey shadows dancing across the wall, the feeling of being watched all over again by uncongenial eyes, the baleful impression once again reignited, illuminating those inauspicious, unfavourable feelings like the wick on a candle. That evening the cottage felt uncommonly cold, which was rather surprising, but it was nothing that a warm fire wouldn't fix, and so before long a glorious fire was burning away happily in the hearth, where the bright orange flames crackled, spit, hissed and curled. Steve and Jeanette sat happily around the fire, drinking long cold glasses of Sauvignon Blanc and talking together. Jeanette stared at the flames of the fire, as though momentarily transfixed by them, when suddenly the couple heard a thumping noise, as if something very hard had been flung down the staircase with an almighty thunderous crash. "What the hell is that?" said Steve. Then they heard another thud, and another one. They ran over to the staircase and found 3 books lying split open at the bottom of the stairs. "How the hell did that happen?" said Steve, rushing up the staircase to check if someone was in the house and playing a practical joke on them. "I mean, books don't go flying downstairs by themselves, do they?" Jeanette's heart leapt with excitement. This was the first sign, she thought, that maybe we're not alone after all. She reached for the first book lying on the terracotta floor, a novel. She read the first line of the words on the page. The sentence read, "The people were advised it was in their best interest to leave." She picked up the second book, and the sentence read, "I'd advise you to go now," Lacey told the butler, "if you know what's good for you." Third book, first sentence read, "I'm warning you to go. This is your last chance. Go before it's too late." Jeanette closed the books, wondering if it was a coincidence that all the books somehow contained cryptic messages. Were they inadvertently being told by some invisible entity to leave? Steve came down the staircase, and Jeanette noticed he seemed disturbed. He was running his hands through his blonde hair in a gesture he only did when he was rather nervous. He picked up the bottom of the wine that he'd been drinking to study its alcoholic content, and asked Jeanette how much wine they'd had to drink. Jeanette looked at Steve with a puzzled expression on her face. "Why, we've only had about 1.5 glasses. You look whiter than a sheet. Did you find anything up there? Is there any explanation as to why those books just threw themselves down the stairs?" Steve did not appear to be listening to Jeanette, but began to pace up and down the living room like a restless lion in a zoo enclosure. "I'm just wondering if I'm seeing things. I could have sworn when I went upstairs. I entered the upstairs spare bedroom. I saw a young man in a plaid shirt. He was smoking. He looked up at me and smirked. Then he was just gone like that." Jeanette grew excited. "Where did you see him?" "I'm not saying I saw anything at all," said Steve. "It's what I thought I saw. I think the wine has gone straight to my head. I've clearly been hallucinating, seeing things that aren't actually there. But for a moment, Jeanette, it seemed so startlingly real. I really think that wine has gone to my head." "Show me where this happened," said Jeanette, following Steve eagerly up the stairs to the smaller bedroom. They entered the bedroom and Jeanette sniffed the air. "That's strange. I smell cigarette smoke in here," she said. "Can you smell it?" "I do. It's very strong." She walked over to the bay window to open it, to invite some fresh air to enter the room. "Ah, that's better. Look," she said, pointing to the bed, where a large indentation had made a huge hollow in the end of the bedspread, as if someone had been sitting there. Steve's face grew grave. "I wasn't imagining what I saw then. Someone was in here." He began to quickly search around the house, but there was no sign of anyone at all. "Can you believe the blatant audacity of it? Someone must have slipped in when we were sitting by the fire. I mean, let's face it, we never locked the front door. It must have been the young man who threw the books down the stairs to scare us half to death. But he has well and truly gone now. What a bloody cheek. I mean, who does that? Breaks into a cottage, has a smoke at the end of a bed, throws a few books down the staircase." Jeanette was not sure what Steve had seen, but she was certain whatever it wasn't of this world, but she wasn't about to tell him that. Sadly for Jeanette, it was a pedestrian, unexceptional evening after the initial excitement. Things remained commonplace and uneventful. Chris felt secure that the cottage was now safely locked, so no intruders could enter the premises, but he put his revolver close to his bedside drawer to feel secure, which was out of character for him to do, which meant, as far as Jeanette was concerned, he must have taken quite a scare earlier on. But if he'd been left feeling slightly unhinged, he was admitting to nothing, which was typical of Chris, who was good at acting nonchalant when his feathers had been clearly ruffled. Jeanette climbed into bed, pulling the covers over her body. switching off her bedside light. "Night, Chris," she said. "Night," came his reply. Jeanette woke feeling very cold. The whole bedroom felt as if the punnelling Arctic winds of Siberia had hit the room so fiercely hard that she went to the cupboard to retrieve some warm blankets. When she returned to her bed and threw a blanket over the sheets, she decided to glance out of the window. Why she chose to do this, she had no idea. It was dark outside, but soft shadows of moonlight danced across the exterior of the cottage. In the meadow she could swear she had seen a dark silhouette moving through the grass. It looked like a shadow person, thought Jeanette, finding herself growing increasingly excited. She had heard about shadow people before, but had never encountered one. This was a moment not to be missed. With her heart thumping wildly, she threw on some sneakers, grabbed a head torch, and tiptoed down the staircase in her blue pinstripe pyjamas, opening the front door and undoing the latch. When she opened the door, she was surprised to find that it wasn't that cold outside. So why did the inside of the house feel like an icebox, she wondered. There was a gentle, cool, bracing, delicious breeze blowing against her face. She felt invigorated as she ran through the long grass of the meadow, through the field of sagebrush, towards the wood grove. Jeanette had never been a fearful person. All her life she'd been hardwired to embrace adventure. She was naturally inquisitive by nature. She wasn't prepared to sit back wondering what it was she'd seen. That would mean all her life she'd be pondering, what was the strange shadow figure I saw out of the window all those years ago? So she was intent on finding out the answer to that question. And there was no time like the present. Steve was always complaining that she was far too impulsive for her own good. But Jeanette did not agree. She believed in seizing the moment. That was all that life was about. And this night was no exception to that golden rule. The ethereal luminescent half-moon, along with the light of her headlamp, provided Jeanette with just enough light to see where she was going. She was now certain that the large shadow of black had disappeared into the woodgrove. She had seen it all too briefly, if only for a second. Her heart thundered excitedly as she neared her approach, grateful that whatever this black shadow being was, she now was seeing it, and it was moving very slowly, almost as if it was floating on air. It had to be a ghostly being, she thought. The gloriously magnificent ponderosa pines and Douglas fir trees swept up into the sky masterfully like graceful perpendicular towers, their needled offshoots jiggling ever so slightly in the breeze, almost as if they were dancing. Jeanette moved cautiously behind one tree after another, with a military precision that would certainly have impressed an army general, taking great care to remain very quiet. That was when she saw the black shadow being all over again. Its back was turned away from her, but the humanoid silhouette was gargantuan in size, dense and burly. This ghost-like spectral being looked like the Incredible Hulk, only it appeared to be covered with hair. It was when it began to grunt and breathe deeply like a horse that Jeanette began to realize that this creature was possibly not a ghost at all. It seemed real. All of a sudden Jeanette coughed very loudly. Where the heck did that come from, she wondered. The creature turned around swiftly at the sound of Jeanette's cough. It became as alert as a guard dog, almost as if its ears had perked up, as if every hair on its body was standing up in attention. It was when the creature turned around and Jeanette saw it clearly that she knew instinctively what it was. The creature she thought was a black shadow being was in fact a Bigfoot. Before she could process what she'd actually observed, the Bigfoot was now looking directly at her, standing only yards away from her. Jeanette froze to the spot. Her legs wobbled beneath her like unstable camping chairs. Her knees buckled. Oh my God, she wondered, was this great big hairy monster going to kill her? It would seem the blood drained from her face as she stared back at the creature, surprised to see that at such close proximity the creature had a human-like face and deep-set dark eyes that were not uncongenial. On the contrary, they seemed rather amused. The creature then coughed like Jeanette had done, as if to say, "Look, I can cough the same as you." Then Jeanette coughed back, and the creature also coughed. Then Jeanette giggled, and so did the creature. As weird as it sounds, it was an unlikely interaction between a human and a Bigfoot. It was what Jeanette would describe later as the coughing game. Jeanette made all kinds of strange coughs. The creature emulated her vast range of coughs. The coughing morphed into other sounds that Jeanette made, like the sound of a dog barking. But the creature made Jeanette's attempts at copying a dog bark seem almost pathetic, as he recreated the noise to perfection, sounding exactly like a dog. It was clear that this was not the first time the creature had emulated a dog bark, nor would it be the last. He also made other impressive sounds for Jeanette to reproduce, which she could not mirror very well, like the hoot of an owl and the howl of a coyote. Her measly attempts at howling made the creature chuckle in his throat, the sound rather reminding her of a deep cat purr. Both Jeanette and the creature had formed an unlikely friendship over this rather bizarre interaction of imitating familiar sounds from the natural world. Finally she pointed to herself and said, "Jeanette." The creature tried to echo her name, failing miserably at first, and then he said it to perfection. Only the net at the end of her name, the Bigfoot pronounced as nit, Janit. The creature reached out to Jeanette's shoulder, patting her with his very large human hand, almost as if he was tapping her. Jeanette believed it was his way of saying, "It was good to meet you." Then he nodded at Jeanette with his pyramid-shaped head, looking intently into her eyes, as if to say, "I really need to go." She watched in awe as it glided away, swinging its arms backwards and forwards, so incredibly gracefully, moving with an efficiency that just defied belief. 5-foot strides at the very least. She secretly marvelled how ghost-like he appeared. No wonder she had perceived him to be a shadow being. He looked exactly like that. Once the Bigfoot had glided away, the reality of what had transpired hit Jeanette like a brick to the head. "Oh my God," she thought, "I've just seen a Bigfoot, and it interacted with me. It was friendly." She couldn't wait to tell Steve about the miraculous encounter that had just transpired, and eagerly raced back to the cottage, feeling like a euphoric kid running out of the woodgrove into the meadow at a crazy speed, her heart just bouncing buoyantly with a joy she could not describe. Finally she opened the door of the cottage, scrambling inside, only to be greeted by Steve standing in the doorway, looking overwrought. "Where have you been?" he demanded, in a fractious tone that punctured the joy in Jeanette's heart instantly, like a deflating beach ball. I thought I heard a noise outside," Jeanette lied. I went outside just, to see what it was." "Something terrible happened in the bedroom, Jeanette, when you were gone." "What?" asked Jeanette. She could see by the expression on Steve's face that something had scared the living daylights out of him. She'd never seen him look so fearful in her life before. His eyes seemed round, almost glazed over, in a delirious confusion. "I woke up. I saw you weren't in your bed. But I heard these combat boots. They were thumping around the bedroom, vibrating across the floorboards. Walking, Jeanette, walking to my side of the bed. The thing, whatever it was, it stood there. And then something grabbed me. It started to choke me. It was on top of my body, Jeanette, holding me down. I could feel hands around my neck. I couldn't breathe, Jeanette. I was fighting back with all my might, but there was nothing there, but I could feel him. He was real." The colour drained from Jeanette's face. "Something tried to strangle you? Oh, my God! That's terrible." Steve nodded. "I could feel the anger and hatred, Jeanette. It smelt very strongly of cigarette smoke. Whatever it was, Jeanette, it wanted me dead. I know it did." "I never expected that to happen here," said Jeanette. "Not something like this." "Of course you didn't expect this to happen, Jeanette. You do say the oddest things sometimes." "You know what I'm thinking, Jeanette? I know this is going to sound far-fetched and irrational, but I think the man I thought I saw smoking at the end of the bed, I think he was a ghost. I think he tried to kill me. I really do. Because I told you I could smell his breath, and it reeked of cigarettes. This place, Jeanette, it's haunted." "I thought you didn't believe in stuff like that, Steve." "Well, I do now. I'll tell you something for nothing, Jeanette. I'm not staying here 1 minute longer. We're leaving now. I know it's dark outside, but I can't risk being attacked by that thing again. Whatever it was, it doesn't want us here." Jeanette thought about the books that had fallen down the stairs, and the cryptic messages almost telling them to leave.
So she nodded her head. You're probably right. They gathered all their belongings together as quickly as possible and locked the front door behind them when Jeanette said, "Oh, I remember I left my watch hanging on the towel rail in the bathroom. I better quickly go and get it." "You what? You did what?" "I was having a shower. I realised my watch was on my wrist, so I put it on the towel rail. I need to get it back now." Jeanette hurriedly entered the cottage for one last time, dashing up the sweeping staircase and running down the upstairs passageway, which led to the bedroom and ensuite bathroom. She could see her gold watch dangling on the towel rail. She grabbed it and put it on her wrist. As she was about to go down the staircase, she was certain she could smell cigarette smoke. On instinct, she opened the door of the spare bedroom. There she saw a young man in a blue plaid shirt, wearing a blue bandana, smoking a cigarette. But this man was definitely a ghost, although for a moment he looked very solid and lifelike as a human being would. He looked up at her, gave her a big smirk, and Jeanette quickly closed the door as fast as she possibly could, running down the staircase in her haste, nearly tripping over herself in the process, her heart thundering through her chest. She could hear combat boots running behind her down the staircase, but she saw nothing. She quickly climbed in the truck to sit beside Steve. She shouted, "What are you waiting for? Get going!" Jeanette looked back at the cottage briefly. The door that she'd slammed behind her so that it naturally locked was now wide open. A figure was standing there. "Go!" she screamed. "Go!" Once they'd reached the interstate, Jeanette sighed with relief, as she and Steve had evaded a major attack. Whatever was in that cottage wasn't good. It wanted her and Steve out. Sagaciously, she decided she was not going to confess to booking into a haunted cottage for the weekend, or about her anomalous encounter with a Bigfoot to Steve. There were some things best left unsaid. Steve had been in the eye of the storm, with the supernatural, so to speak. It was up to him to decide whether ghosts were real or not. From Jeanette's perspective, she knew without a doubt that our soul lives on, for the ghost she had seen in that bedroom had physically acknowledged her with that nasty smirk. It wasn't like a photograph on the fabric of time, or some kind of impression like that. This had definitely been a brief interaction with a ghost, whom had clearly acknowledged her presence as much as she had acknowledged his. To cut a long story short, Jeanette phoned Alice to ask what she had failed to ask before. "Who is haunting your cottage?" she asked the girl. "What's the story connected to the place?" "Well, the cottage is supposed to be haunted by two ghosts, I gather. One's a young man who died in the 70s. He lived in that cottage with his parents and OD'd on drugs. I gather his mother found him lying deceased in his bedroom. By all accounts, he's a rather insidious character. Many people claim to smell him smoking cigarettes, or to have heard a man's raspy voice screaming in their ear to get out. He doesn't like people being around. He sometimes tries to push people down the stairs. The other ghost is of an old woman who lived in the cottage over 100 years ago. She's been seen around the place, but I think even she's bullied away by the young man." Jeanette thanked Alice for the privilege of staying in her cottage, but one thing was for certain: she wouldn't be going back there in a hurry. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, Miss Polanski was a skyscraper, a very tall, wiry woman, with legs so incredibly long, she rather reminded me of a giraffe. When she sat down at her desk in front of the class, I would often wonder where her legs would go, or what it would be like to sit next to her on one of those long-haul flights in economy class. As how would she manage to sit down in such a confined space with legs that went on and on forever? I couldn't envisage anything worse than sitting next to someone as prodigious as her on a flight. Of course, behind her back, some people called her derogatory, ignominious, abject names, rather like Daddy Longlegs or Giraffe, although giraffes are such graceful animals, aren't they? And being described as one is hardly undignified. On the contrary, it's almost an accolade or compliment to be compared to one. If you saw Mrs. Polanski walking next to any of the other teachers at school, she'd tower above them, dwarfing everyone in her wake, making even the taller, bigger teachers seem almost inconspicuous and obscure, as Mrs. Polanski would invariably become the focal point in any room. You couldn't miss her. I'm not sure how tall she actually was, but she was easily over 6 foot,
which for a woman is startlingly tall. She would dress in beautiful vintage clothes that looked like the flattering stylish outfits you would have found in the 50s, but where she brought her fabulous shoes from is anyone's guess, as her substantial-sized feet were absolutely enormous. I don't think standard shoe shops would stock her size. Sometimes I noticed that she would deliberately almost bend her legs to appear shorter, but I knew it wasn't due to self-esteem issues or low self-confidence. It was more for the benefit of the people around her, so they wouldn't feel quite so intimidated or overshadowed by her. Miss Polanski was a quiet, demure, reticent woman who would study you through her inquiring cornflower blue eyes, beneath the thick, long, dark lashes that framed them, that were exactly like a giraffe's lashes. Similarly, she was equally as elegant and dignified. I'd often wonder what she was thinking, as her inscrutable, punctilious expression never gave anything away. Much like a giraffe, being tall and majestic had given her a benign, demure and unassuming demeanour to her nature that I often found so abundant in tall people, who similarly were also benevolent. She was one of those tender-hearted people that meditated a great deal, but never really expanded on her thoughts. And unlike many of the teachers in school, nobody knew much about her at all, apart from the fact that she'd grown up in Houston in Texas and moved to Portland 7 years ago. I knew she had never been married, but that didn't surprise my father in the least, as he emphatically believed most men would find it intimidating to go out with women much bigger than they were, explaining that it was demasculating. "I couldn't do it," he told my mother. "I couldn't possibly cope with a woman being taller than me." "So you mean you wouldn't have married me if I was taller than you?" my mother challenged him. "I'm sorry, darling, but probably not. I don't want a woman to be bigger than me." Of course, my mother reacted to my father's comments adversely, as if they offended her personally. "Don't be ridiculous, Morris. Some men love tall women. They appreciate the beauty of their glorious height." My father had responded with words he would often use when he wasn't agreeing with my mother, but was letting it slide. "If you say so, dear." My mother would raise her eyebrows and roll her eyes, as if my fallacious father was being exceedingly unreasonable. "What about Nicole Kidman and Tom Cruise, then? She was taller than him when they got married." At that, my father said nothing. The subject was invariably closed. I learnt from my father from a very young age that to keep the peace with my mother, you simply shut up. You didn't argue. And if you didn't agree with her, but were permitting her to have the last word, you would say, "If you say so, dear." If she wanted him to agree to something that he was undecided about, he would say, "Well, we'll see," which was another way to leave things hanging in the clouds, with no real affirmative answer, in order to avoid any form of commitment. "But she is pretty, isn't she?" my mother persisted. "Miss Polanski, I mean." "I wouldn't know, dear," said my father. "I'd have to crane my head to look up at her face." "Now that's mean," said my mother, giving my father a gentle tap with her hand in mock protest. "You're dreadful, sweetheart. You can be so unkind with your stinging words." My father chuckled with laughter. He thoroughly enjoyed winding my mother up, knowing that such elucidation from him would certainly get under her skin. My mother was the kind of person that staunchly stuck up for the underdog, always fighting their corner for them, like a savvy public defender. On this particular occasion during class, Miss Polanski was desirous for her pupils to come up personally to the front of the classroom to do a speech. "It's very important for you to be able to speak at random about anything," she explained. "Now I'd like you to tell the class something that happened to you that impacted your life in a profound way. I want you to talk about your greatest epiphany," she said, scribbling the word epiphany on the board, causing the chalk to squeak. Now, this is one of my favourite words of all time in the English language. It's a beautiful, transformative word, representative of change, rather like leaving the cocoon from being a caterpillar to become a beautiful, colourful, awe-inspiring butterfly that is able to stretch your wings and fully fly. I want you to talk about your personal epiphany. It could be something that someone said to you that influenced the way you think today. Or it could be a consummate experience you had on a holiday or at home that unmitigatingly transformed your life in a positive way. I want you to think about that very clearly, as that's what we're going to talk about today. Jade, why don't you start the ball rolling for us, won't you? You tell the class about your greatest epiphany. Jade walked up to the front of the class with a confident, resolute swagger. I knew why Miss Polanski had selected her, for she knew that Jade's self-assurance would break the ice for those of us in the class that were far less confident than she was. Jade stood in front of the other pupils with a sanguine assertiveness, pulling her back up as straight as she could to make herself appear bigger. She was a very petite girl. Well, my mother's a nutritionist, and over the years she's made me eat all kinds of horrible food. Stuff I really don't like. She always made me feel I had to eat this yucky food in order to be healthy. She'd say, Jade, you must eat it because it's really good for you. My epiphany happened to me one day here on the school playground when I was sitting next to Bobby over there, she said, pointing to the young boy, who immediately sat up straight from his previously slouched position as he heard his name being mentioned. He seemed rather startled to consider that his own words had evoked an epiphany in someone. It was enigmatic to him to believe that he was capable of changing someone's life in such a profound way. This certainly was news to him. So he hung on to Jade's words, wondering what on earth he could have said to provoke an epiphany. So it was Bobby who gave you an epiphany, said Miss Polanski, looking impressed. Jade nodded. It was at lunch break when I pulled out my brown bread sandwiches, groaning because I didn't like what I was eating. I complained bitterly that I didn't like my lunch very much. Bobby wrinkled his brow. He said to me, Why would you eat something you don't like? I said to him, Because it's good for me, silly. Bobby found that very bewildering. He said, Why don't you eat something that's good for you that you really enjoy? Personally, if it was me, I wouldn't eat something I didn't like. I remember thinking he was absolutely right. Why hadn't I thought about that before? Why was I forcing myself to eat something I hated? It seemed like such a negligible, inconsequential, off-the-cuff comment, but I promise you, Miss Polanski, it changed my life. Now I choose healthy food, but stuff I like. My philosophy has now even rubbed off on my own mother. We both avoid eating stuff we don't like. I know it sounds insignificant for most people, but for me it was a revelation. There's a plethora of good, healthy alternatives out there. So if you don't like chopped liver, then you don't eat it. There are other choices that will be equally as beneficial and good for you. Thank you, Jade, for that. Do you see, Bobby, one comment that you made quite literally changed Jade's life. Something we're oblivious to is the power of our own words, the profound effect they can have on one another. Sometimes we have no comprehension that we're all magical beings with enormous influence in changing lives around us, sometimes with just the power of our words. So always think before you open your mouth, as words can heal and regenerate, bringing hope, healing and infinite possibility. But they can also kill, steal and destroy, robbing us of our hopes and our dreams. Who's up next? Asked Mrs. Polanski. Paul, how about you? I think my epiphany came to me when my grandmother died. We had an open coffin at her funeral. My parents wanted me to look at her body. It really scared the living daylights for me to see my grandmother like that. When I looked at her body in the coffin, she looked exactly like a porcelain doll. Her face was so terribly white. They had made her up. They did her hair, put her in her favourite dress. But when I looked at my grandmother in her coffin, I knew that was not her any more. It was like a shell. Her essence had gone. It really made me think about death a whole lot after that, and how one day we'll all end up in a coffin just like her. That was a sobering thought for me. I decided from that moment on that we have to make the most of every day. I know I'm only 10 years old, but that doesn't matter. My mother says life goes by very quickly. So I think we need not allow the little things to get us down, but to live our lives to the fullest, because one day we'll end up in a coffin, just like my grandmother. That is an excellent epiphany, Paul, said Miss Polanski. Sometimes here in America we brush death under the carpet all too frequently and make it become a taboo subject to talk about, causing a great deal of discomfort for people. But many cultures around the world embrace death, so it's not a subject that brings on feelings of discomfort. They've learnt to accept death as a natural sequence of life. That's a powerful epiphany, Paul, that we can all learn from, that life is indeed terribly short and we need to make the most of it. Jade put up her hand. Yes, Jade. Please tell us your epiphany, Miss Polanski. We'd love to hear yours. Very well, said Miss Polanski. I will. My epiphany happened when I was about your age. I was always the tallest girl in my class. I'd tower above all the other kids at school. I'd feel so self-conscious. I didn't fit in with the other boys and girls. It made me feel very humiliated, salient, and let's just say conspicuous. I stuck out like a sore thumb, which made me feel so out of place. I desperately wanted to belong, not to stand out in a flagrant way that I did. I didn't want to be different, but I soon realised that there wasn't a jot I could actually do about that fact, that I was audaciously tall. If I allowed it to make me miserable and self-conscious, I knew it would absolutely ruin my life. So instead I chose to embrace it. I never looked back after that. My epiphany was that being different isn't such a big deal after all. Sometimes even it can be a blessing for you. For one, I can reach places others can't, and having long legs makes me have a bigger stride when I walk. And of course it's easy to just pop the netball right through the net without aiming too hard. How about you, Jamie? Why don't you come up here and tell us your story? Jamie went up to the front of the class. He was a shy boy who didn't say very much, so sometimes he would simply disappear or retreat into the background, so you'd hardly even know he was there. I knew his father lived on a farm with his new stepmother, that he spent weekends with his dad, as his parents had recently got divorced. I'd seen his mother picking him up from school on occasions. She was like a capricious dragon, a scary-looking woman that intimidated everyone with her rough, fractious demeanour. "Oh, there you are," she would hiss. "Get a move on, Jamie." I could see the frightened look in Jamie's eyes as he wilfully obeyed his mother. I knew at a glance that she was not a nice woman. Jamie looked awkward as he stood in front of the class. He was twitching his fingers nervously, tightening his fists occasionally, so that the knuckles began to show. "It's all right, Jamie," said Miss Polanski, lowering her voice to a gentle, encouraging tone. "We're all human. We won't bite. You go on. Tell us your epiphany." Jamie looked worried, as if he was processing what he was going to say, inwardly struggling or debating whether he should say it at all. His wary eyes darted around the classroom judiciously, like a discerning hawk. He then straightened out his back so he stood proud and tall like a pencil. And then he said, "My epiphany happened when I went to stay on my father's farm. I was walking in the woods when I suddenly sensed I was being watched. I knew I wasn't imagining things. I could almost certainly feel inquisitive eyes staring at me. I really could. But when I looked around me, nothing was there. I was collecting pine cones which I was going to paint white for Christmas decorations. I had a bag with me to gather the pine cones in, when a pine cone went flying directly at me, followed by another one and another. And they kept hitting me gently in the back. Not hard, but very gently. When I looked around, I couldn't see anything there. It really perturbed and puzzled me, because I knew someone had thrown those pine cones at me intentionally, to obviously get my attention. But then nobody was there. So I really was puzzled. It was as I was looking around the woods that I heard this muffled chuckle, as if something was trying to stop me hearing it laugh. They were having a laugh at my expense, very clearly. And that was when I looked up at the tree and I saw a little Bigfoot sitting on the branches. It was staring down at me, with these deep-set, bear-like dark eyes, on a very human-looking face. It was covered in long brown hair, not dark brown, more like a medium colour brown. It was thin and lanky, and was possibly about 3 foot tall. I knew at once it was a Bigfoot, as I'd seen documentaries about them before. My mother doesn't like me watching those shows on television. She says people are making stuff up just to increase their viewership, and that Bigfoots aren't real. I was shocked to see this creature was, because I knew he was as real as you or me are. He jumped off the branch and helped me gather some more pine cones in my bag. I wasn't scared of him. He was really nice and very friendly. He couldn't stop chatting all the time, really garrulously, in a language that I couldn't understand at all. All of a sudden there was a loud whistle. I think it must have been his mother calling him, because he patted me on the back as if to say goodbye, and then he glided away into the woods. I was so shocked by what I'd seen. Until that point, I thought that my mother and dad were always right about everything they told me. They both told me that Bigfoot was a fictional character, but I realised they were both wrong, because I've seen him for myself, so I know he's real. Wow, that's an incredible story, said Miss Polanski. So your epiphany was that your parents don't always know everything. They don't have the answers, and of course you would be absolutely right about that. None of us know everything. I'm sure there are creatures out there in North America that none of us have ever encountered before. Our country is incredibly large, as it is vast and wide. So much unexplored wilderness and terrain that has never been navigated by man. So who knows what undiscovered species could be lurking out there? Scientists are constantly rediscovering animals that are supposed to be extinct, resurfacing again and again. Now, who's up next? I surreptitiously glanced around the classroom at the sea of faces to gauge their reaction to Jamie's story. I had discerned that from the very moment Jamie had opened his mouth, every single eye in the classroom was pinned on him, and nobody had even flinched. I had thought people might pooh-pooh him, dismissing him out of hand for talking a load of baloney by making his whole story up. But not one person challenged him on his anomalous, absurd encounter, which was unusual, as there were two loudmouths in our class, Natalie and Montrose, who were quick to shout out their strong opinions on things, always giving their last word on a matter. But on this occasion, their garrulous impudence had been thwarted. The cynics in the class seemed to be silenced, as the one thing I knew about Jamie Bartholomew was that he was a serious boy, who was not inclined to make stuff up. So the fact that he swore blind to encountering a Bigfoot really got me thinking. He was an unassuming character, who never put his neck on the line for no reason at all, or naturally drew attention to himself. So for him to stand boldly before the class, without batting an eyelid, talking about a controversial subject that was guaranteed to ruffle a few feathers, meant in my opinion that it was more than likely that he was telling the truth. And such a profound revelation sent thrills running down my spine. For the idea that the king of the forest could indeed be real was just momentous to me. I was 10 at the time, with 2 older brothers at home. We lived in Portland. Both my brothers swore blind that Bigfoot was not real, and without a question of a doubt, if either of my brothers had known about my infatuation with the mythical beast, I would have been teased mercilessly. It was shortly after Jamie's confession in class that I made a sagacious decision. I decided that I was going to become his best friend, so that maybe he would invite me back to his father's farm, and we could search for Bigfoot together and have a unique encounter all of our own. I knew it wouldn't be easy to befriend someone as private and contained as Jamie was. He was a shy, self-effacing boy who would sit on his own in the far corner of the playground eating his sandwiches, sometimes reading a book. He barely interacted with anyone at all, nor did he mix with the more popular students. He liked to keep himself to himself. So when I approached him at the far side of the playground and asked him if I could sit down with him, he looked up at me with bewilderment on his face as if to say, "Well, what do you want with me?" But he nodded at me. "Suit yourself," he said, as he continued to read, almost wilfully ignoring me. But I was not put off that easily. In truth, I'm not sure he was concentrating on his book at all. He kept giving me sideways, furtive glances. "By the way," I said, "I meant to tell you your speech in class the other day was really impressive." Jamie sighed with a look of suspicion sweeping across his face. "If you're here to make fun of me, I'd appreciate it if you just left." "Why would I make fun of you? I'm being deadly serious. On the contrary, I was blown away by your story. You see, if I had a Bigfoot encounter like you did, well, put it this way, I'd have kept my mouth tightly shut. I mean, there's so many scoffers out there, aren't they? So quick to ridicule people. But you had real guts speaking out like that in front of the entire class. I couldn't have done it myself. The truth is, I'm a complete and total wuss. Even my brothers don't know I'm interested in the subject of Bigfoot, and if they did, they would have a field day taunting me, making fun of me. They can be brutal. In truth, I don't recommend older brothers at all. They can give you a real hard time. Well, at least mine do." Jamie looked up at me in surprise. "So you believe my story?" 100%, 1,000% if you like. When you told your story in class, do you know no one moved a pencil? They didn't even flinch for a second. Everybody stared at you with round, wide eyes. They were awestruck. You gripped your entire audience. I don't think anyone doubted you for a single moment, not even the two biggest doubting Thomases in our class. If you had been one of the big exaggerators boasting about seeing a Bigfoot, I would have been inclined to doubt your story. But coming from you, well, you're a reliable witness, someone whose words you can trust." At that, Jamie chuckled. "I must admit," he said, "they never did say a word, did they? They all looked so stunned. But I wonder, do you think Miss Polanski believed my story? I don't know. Possibly. The problem is adults can be very difficult, can't they? Sometimes it's hard to tell what they're actually thinking. But I think Miss Polanski appreciated your epiphany. I really do. That adults don't know everything. I'm actually beginning to learn that myself with my own parents. When I was 7 or 8, I really believed my father knew everything there was to know and was never wrong about anything. But now I'm able to see he's likely to make mistakes just as much as the next person. How about your mother? Did you tell her about your Bigfoot encounter or not?" Jamie grimaced. "Are you kidding? I'd never tell my mother something like that. Me and my mother don't get along that great, I'm afraid. She's a difficult woman, always angry. I tend to prefer to keep out of her way. I think even my dad was a bit frightened by her when they were married. She'd fly off the handle over the most insignificant, silly things that were so ridiculous to get upset about. But my mother would blow everything out of proportion. My father found her far too intense. I wanted to live with my dad full-time when they got divorced. I told the judge that in court. Let's just say it went down like a lead balloon with my mother. She's still angry about it today. She says I'm an ungrateful brat for siding with my dad." "Well, then why don't you live with your dad full-time?" I asked. "Did the judge not honour your own decision?" "No, it was a bummer. He said he believed kids should be raised by their mother. But in truth, my dad has been much more of a father and a mother to me. You know, I believe some people shouldn't raise children. My mother is one of those people. But how could I get the judge to understand that? They think they know so much more than the child when they plan out your lives, for they falsely believe they know best. I'd like the judge to try living with my mother for one day. He'd be asking for divorce papers in the next hour." "So when do you see your father?" I asked curiously. "On the weekend," said Jamie. "If you want, you can come and stay the weekend with me. We can go looking for the Bigfoot together. I've not been in the Woodgrove since I saw the creature last, but I would appreciate a friend with me. Dad's always saying I should bring someone over for the weekend, but I'm not exactly the most demonstrative person, so I don't make friends very easily. You don't have to come if you don't want. I'll understand, of course." I couldn't believe that Jamie was already asking me to come and stay with him for the weekend. I was absolutely thrilled. And after my mother had agreed to the arrangements, it was all planned. "That's funny," she said to me. "You never mentioned being friendly with a Jamie before." "Why, I don't think you've even mentioned him once." "Well, maybe you weren't listening," I said. It was on a Friday after school that Jamie's mother collected us from outside the school gates. I had my overnight bag with me. "Who have we got here?" she asked, looking at me with an aggrieved expression on her face, as if the last thing she wanted in the world was another child on her hands. "This is Ralph, Mummy. He's staying the weekend at Dad's farm with me." "I see," said his mother, looking at me with a tense jaw and a pair of icy cold eyes. "Well, you better come with us then, hadn't you?" she said in an uncongenial tone of voice, devoid of any kindness. "I didn't know Jamie had any friends," she said sarcastically. I got a close look at Miss Bartholomew and could see that the creases on her skin were very pronounced, clearly accentuating that most of the time she wore a frown on her stone-like face. She was a thin woman with no soft curves to her body, which was as hard and unyielding as she was. She was quite emaciated, wearing a skinny pair of jeans with designer holes in the knee area and a tight-fitting red tank top. Her blonde shoulder-length hair hung around her face in limp rat's tails, exposing large black roots in the central parting, while her weathered skin looked rather like a wizened old tortoise. As she climbed into the truck of her car, she pressed her foot down on the accelerator and began to drive down the streets of Portland like an impulsive, carefree, joyriding teenager, taking precarious risks in order to conquer the traffic on the road. As she unflinchingly drove through red lights, tapping away at her cell phone as she was driving, sometimes failing to even keep both hands on the steering wheel, which scared me half to death. I don't believe I've ever seen such an atrocious driver in my life before. When we got stuck in gridlock traffic, she began to grow frustrated and very impatient. She started honking her horn. Someone gave her a finger. Then she climbed out of her truck once the traffic had stopped, brazenly marching towards the truck driver, knocking aggressively on his window. "Don't you bloody go pointing your finger at me!" she screamed at the man. He pulled down his window and yelled back, "You drive like a maniac, woman! You don't even watch where you're going! You were zigzagging down the road!" "You talk rubbish," she said, shouting back at him. "You're a complete loser! Go and F yourself!" she said, storming back to the car. "What a complete tosser," she said, as she got back into the driving seat. "Some people shouldn't be allowed to drive. That man should lose his bloody licence." Jamie looked at me, shrugging his shoulders, and even though he said absolutely nothing, I knew exactly what he was saying. "I told you she's mad." Jamie lived with his mother in the southeast section of Portland, between Stark Street and Hawthorne Boulevard, and from 28th Avenue to 48th Avenues. It was a congenial neighbourhood with an urban-suburban mixed feel about it. His mother lived in a semi-detached home there, which had been built in the 50s. On the inside it was a very bog-standard run-of-the-mill home, lacking any style and depth. It looked like your standard furnishings that had been copied directly out of a brochure, as there was no personal touches to the home, to make it cosy and comforting. If anything, its cold, uncongenial ambience reflected Jamie's mother's cold, heartless personality to a T. We waited at Jamie's home and played with a jigsaw together in his bedroom until his father came to pick us up. I could hear James's mother on the phone having a rant with someone. "I told you I ordered the orange one, but you guys sent me the pink one. Can you not read my order, or are you completely dumb?" "Rude? I'm not rude. I'm saying it as it is. I'm sorry if the truth hurts, but you're bloody stupid. F you too." "Is your mother always like that? So confrontational?" I asked Jamie. "Always," he said. I must say I was heartily relieved when James's father came to pick us up in his truck. I was hoping to avoid any interaction with Jamie's mother. I could understand why Jamie kept his distance from her when she was around. His mother stood on the doorway as if blocking the way for us to make our quick escape. I was to learn from Jamie that she would always pull the stunt when his father came to pick him up, as if her arms were invisible bars trying to block out her husband. She stood there with a haughty look on her face, with a glass of white wine in one of her hands and a cigarette in the other. She glared at James's father defiantly as he approached the door, taking a big puff from her cigarette, studying him with an expression of great distaste in her eyes. "You're late," she scoffed. "You were supposed to pick the boys up half an hour ago. I'm supposed to be going out on a date later." "I'm sorry, Belinda, but I got caught up in traffic. I was held up. It's Bedlam out there." "Always excuses with you, aren't there, Richard? The story of your life. Nothing ever changes with you, does it? I'm surprised that your new wife hasn't got sick of you yet, thrown you to the curb. She must be an absolute saint to put up with the likes of you." "Maybe not all women are as cold as you, Belinda." "Cold? Me cold? I'll tell you something for nothing, Richard. I'm hot stuff. It's a pity the same can't be said about you. Let's not pick pieces out of each other, Belinda. I'm here to pick up the kids." I was never more relieved to be in the back of James's father's truck. It was like the tension I'd felt in his mother's company had evaporated like the steam from a kettle. I could see that Jamie had relaxed too. He wore a big smile on his face. The further we got away from his mother's house, the more relaxed we both became. James's father lived on a farm in the Willamette Valley, which runs from the Columbia River in Portland south through Salem to the Columbia Mountains outside Eugene, where he grew orchards of pears. It wasn't long before we were driving through the farm gate, down a long asphalt driveway framed by orchards of pears that were aligned in perfectly neat straight lines. I was struck by the varying shades of green in the landscape, from the yellowed greens to the olives, to the blue greens, the black greens and golds. It was all very beguiling, and all under a blue cobalt sky. In the furthest distance I could see the undulating, sweeping, curvaceous folds and curls of the hills, softening the landscape with their three-dimensional allure. And there were trees of every kind, clustered together in congenial groups, most specifically ponderosa pines, maples, red alders, oaks and dogwoods. And there were contrasting colours and shapes that were very arresting to the eye. Jamie's father lived in the most exquisite red brick double-storey farmhouse with large French windows, a grey slate roof and a wraparound porch that hugged the house that was lifted by columns on the lowest elevation. When we arrived at the farmhouse, a woman with a big beam on her face came racing down the large staircase, enveloping us with warm, effusive, welcoming hugs. This was Jamie's stepmother, whose name was Pearl. She really was a warm character. I had a very enjoyable day with Jamie, as we had a large barbecue later in the evening with his parents, and during the day we went on ATV rides down some of the hiking trails in the woodgrove. It was later that night that I suggested to Jamie that if he wanted to see his Bigfoot friend again, the best opportunity for an encounter would likely occur that night. Jamie reflected on this for a moment, deciding that I was absolutely right, so he set his mobile phone to about 1 o'clock in the morning. It's funny how easy it sounds hypothetically getting up early in the morning after you've been caught up in a blissful dream state. When Jamie shook me wide awake out of my sleep, I groaned, throwing the covers over my head as I tried to shake him off. James's voice sounded bitterly disappointed. "You don't want to come and look for the Bigfoot then?" he asked. There must be a magical ring to the word Bigfoot, as I immediately sat up, and the sleep almost evaporated from my eyes. Now I was wide awake. He had my undivided attention. I could feel my heart thundering excitedly in my chest as I swiftly grabbed my jeans and a sweatshirt, throwing them on, along with the headlamp on my head. Me and James tiptoed down the landing, passing his parents' bedroom. Their door was slightly ajar. We could hear their rhythmic snoring. We tiptoed discreetly down the sweeping staircase. With every step it creaked and groaned. I was terrified we'd wake them up, for if we did we would almost certainly be told to go straight back to bed. We tiptoed through the living room. James beckoned for me to follow him discreetly. He put a key in the sliding door, sliding the door right back. Then we were standing on the wooden deck of the wraparound porch, greeted to the sounds of the night, from the chirping crickets to the croaking frogs, to the faint smell of barbecue smoke still hanging on the wind. It felt so magical being outside at night, under the velvety canopy of a dark, tenebrous sky, lit up by the effusive yellow light of the half-moon, and a scattering of glittering stars that twinkled like silvery diamonds from the firmament. I followed James as he gestured for me to keep close to him. We moved over the brick courtyard, across the pristinely mown lawn of his parents' yard, towards a precipitous hilly embankment with a steep rocky incline, interspersed with rugged turf and climbing creepers. We ascended up the hilly elevation until we entered the woodgrove, filled with the fragrant scent of pine. The dense, dark silhouettes of the mixed trees, some deciduous, others evergreen, were as unique and different as a crowd of people, some tall and imposing, others burly, wide and big. But all had one thing in common. They appeared to be swaying in the breeze, their boughs moving, their leaves rustling, as if they were dancing. The earthen floor seemed soft, although I did find I was crunching twigs and leaf litter under my leather soles, taking care to avoid the feathery ferns and rambunctious shrubs growing beneath the trees. James pointed to a large pair of eyes staring at us from a branch on the tree. The owner of those eyes, a large owl, swooped down before us, diving onto the ground, hoisting up a mouse into its talons. It began to tear up the flesh beneath its claws. It didn't seem fazed or daunted by our presence as it continued to eat, stuffing the flesh hungrily into its beak, while watching us through wide, curious eyes. I went up to a tree, picking up a stick from the ground, and I began to knock the trunk, much like they do on the series Finding Bigfoot. But I waited. There was no response. I could feel disenchantment when no answer was forthcoming. I tried again, pounding the trunk of the tree several times as hard as I could, again and again, but nothing happened. We continued to walk through the woodgrove. I could feel the disappointment rising up in my gut as I realized that nothing was going to happen tonight. But then what was I expecting? A miracle? I'd seen enough Bigfoot programs on television to know that so many of the searches had been fruitless. Why should I expect anything different for myself? All of a sudden, Jamie nudged me. He whispered, "Listen! Can you hear it?" I perked up my ears. I looked at him with a nonplussed expression on my face.
But I don't hear anything, I protested.
Exactly, said Jamie. Don't you see the forest has grown airily quiet? He was right. I became painfully aware that there was no background noises anymore. I was not sure I liked the feeling the stillness engendered, as the overtones of the forest became disturbingly foreboding, baleful, inauspicious. I could feel nasty chills travelling down my spine. But this time the chills were not the pleasurable kind, stimulated by a rising level of exuberance. No, this time the chills were menacing. I could sense something was definitely watching us. It was an awfully airy feeling that made me feel vulnerable and afraid. I looked around. My body was trembling. I could feel a mighty presence surrounding us, even though I could see nothing. Imagine an elephant in your bedroom, for example, but you don't see it. You will definitely feel its presence. Before I could express my misgivings to James, one of the dogwood trees began to bob up and down unnaturally. A large branch broke off the tree, falling onto the ground with such a terrifying thump that I almost jumped out of my skin like a startled jack-in-the-box. Then we saw him. There are no words to describe what we saw, for there is no Bigfoot program on television that does justice to truly express in a fathomable way the sheer size of these monstrously huge creatures. I saw the large sultry silhouette of a humongous Bigfoot standing up at about 9 foot tall. He was staring at us through dark, deep-set eyes, with an incredulous look on his face, as if he was saying, "What are you doing here?" I think he wasn't pleased to make our acquaintance. He seemed cantankerous and belligerent, like a grumpy old man. I watched in horror as his mouth rolled back to reveal the most intimidating human-like teeth that glistened like pearls under the light of our headlamps. It was then that he began to growl at us, exactly like a fierce canine dog. It was a warning growl that was almost telling us to get the hell out of the woodgrove. The growl then morphed into the most horrifying roar that was so fearsome that I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. It was like there was a lump in the back of my throat that vanquished my ability to make any sound at all. The male Bigfoot began to pound his chest vigorously, as if to establish who was boss. It was like he was saying, "This is my forest. You're trespassing on my turf." The next thing I knew was I heard the thumping sound, and that was when we saw a little Bigfoot appearing through the brush. He was about 3 foot tall. When he looked in Jamie's direction, he made an excited, chattering sound. It was clear he recognized Jamie instantly. He was thrilled to see him again. The little creature turned around to his father and began to talk non-stop, pointing to Jamie. His voice was effusive and excited. It was like he was saying, "I know Jamie, Dad. Be reasonable. He's my friend." It was extraordinary as we listened to the small Bigfoot talking to his father, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, backwards and forwards, in an earnest voice. They spoke in an audible language that sounded like an ancient language. I watched in amazement as the anger on the large male Bigfoot subsided like a hot air balloon, deflating once it had been punctured. The Bigfoot demeanour changed. He looked at us with benevolent eyes and nodded towards us. The little Bigfoot ran towards Jamie, his eyes literally glittering with a sparkling, effervescent enthusiasm which was contagious. Jamie fiddled around in his pocket and pulled out a large bag of marbles that he'd bought to give his Bigfoot friend. The Bigfoot looked at the marbles, whooping with excitement. The 3 of us sat on the forest floor, playing marbles together. It was such a fun game. When I looked up, I could see the silhouettes of a female and male Bigfoot watching us from behind the trees, like 2 proud parents, pleased to see their son interacting with 2 human children. I no longer felt afraid, as I knew we had their blessing. It was about 4 o'clock in the morning when we returned back to the red brick farmhouse, leaving our Bigfoot friend behind with his stash of marbles, which he went to show off to his parents exclusively, who studied each and every marble with an expression of wondrous awe on their faces. The next morning Jamie and me slept in to way past lunchtime. His father could not comprehend why we were so exhausted, but after this unique experience our friendship was firmly cemented by this incredible encounter, and Jamie was to become my very best friend. We went to boarding school in later years. Then we both got married to 2 girls who were also best friends. Regretfully, James has seen no further sightings of the Bigfoots on his father's land, But that night when we played marbles together with a little Bigfoot is a night that will be indelibly imprinted on my mind as one of the best moments of my life and one of my all-time favourite memories. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. Stuart sat bolt upright in bed. He could swear he'd heard a knock at the door. Was he mistaken? It could easily be the howling wind, he thought. But no, he definitely heard a distinctive rapping sound. He cautiously climbed out of bed, tiptoeing towards the window that faced the front of the house, overlooking the street, to see if he could discern any signs of movement. He twitched back a fraction of the curtain, to peer out surreptitiously over the front yard. It was a dark, tenebrous night, with a half-moon obscured by a hazy, claggy mist, but it was still bucketing down with rain. The wind whistled through the trees. Stuart could see the familiar long ribbon of asphalt gleaming with wetness under the assault and thrashing power of the rain, caught under the infusive light of the street lamps. He noticed the semi-detached houses on either side of the street, all swept in darkness, as most of the residential houses had motion-activated outside lights. But no one's lights had been stimulated by any random outside movement. Everything seemed unusually quiet in terms of any signs of human activity or lone trucks driving down the road. Apart from nature's elements, of course. He could distinctly hear the pelting sound of the rain beating down on the roof, along with the punnelling sounds of the wind whipping the wooden rafters so they rattled precariously. He noted that the flowering cherry and elm trees that framed either side of the street jiggled their boughs like belly dancers as the torrential rain came down in sheets. That was when he noticed one of the boughs of the crabapple trees that grew directly outside his aunt's bedroom had been knocking against the window, making a curious rapping sound. It was certainly nasty weather out there, he thought. Then he heard the knocking sound again, but discerned it was not the crabapple tree that was making that noise. It was something else. He couldn't isolate that sound specifically. It wasn't the wind, nor the rain, or the crabapple tree. No, it was definitely something else. But what? He couldn't imagine. Maybe there really was someone at the front door. He knew that Hattie had not installed a doorbell, as she simply despised all modern gadgets that made nasty clangorous noises and interfered with the peace. The knocking sound started up again, only this time it sounded significantly harder, much more urgent. Then he was in no doubt that there had to be someone at the door. He glanced briefly at the large clock on the mantel of the bedroom fireplace. It was 2 o'clock in the morning. What the hell, he thought. Who would be at the door at this ungodly, insane time of the morning? He knew that Hattie Fairbank's house had been raided a couple of times by burglars before, but nothing had ever been taken, so he felt his hackles rise ever so slightly. Should he be concerned about someone disturbing him at this time of the morning? He reached for his dressing gown hanging behind the hook on the bedroom door, wrapping it around his body generously, while plunging his feet into a pair of sheepskin slippers. He scrambled hurriedly down the long, sweeping, ornate mahogany staircase. I could just ignore the knocking, he thought to himself. Then maybe whoever they are will go away. The knocking persisted, so he found himself in the entrance hall, peeping through the peephole in the door. He could see a young woman standing in the outside entrance, looking completely drenched to the skin. He surreptitiously opened the door. "Yes," he said. A young woman with blonde hair, made darker by the fact that it was wet, stood in the doorway carrying a suitcase in her hands, looking like a half-drowned rat. Her teeth were chattering, she was so cold. "I'm sorry to wake you up at this unearthly time. Is Hattie here?" asked the girl. "Hattie Fairbank." "Sorry," said Stuart. "She's away. She's my aunt. I'm house-sitting for her, taking care of her indoor plants and her 2 cats. "Oh dear," said the woman, a frown beginning to develop on her feminine heart-shaped face. "It's a real bummer, it really is. I'm from LA, you see. I was hoping to crash here with Hattie for a few days. She always said when I was in these parts I was very welcome to stay over." Stuart did not quite know how to react to this unforeseen, rather worrisome confession. The girl looked harmless enough, but he didn't like the idea of inviting an innocuous, perfect stranger into the house whom he knew nothing about. Was that not inviting trouble? She could be anyone. He didn't know her from Adam, irrespective of how benign she appeared on the surface.
"There is one big problem," he said, looking a tad uncomfortable. "I can't invite you to stay. You must appreciate Hattie is not here, but you are very welcome to come in and dry off. Maybe change into some fresh clothes in the bathroom. Wait for the rain to subside and recede. I can also make you a cup of hot chocolate if you like, to warm you up before you make tracks again."
"Now you're speaking my language," said the young woman, giving Stuart an irresistible smile. "I'd love to come in if I may. My name is Shelley, by the way. You are?"
"Stuart." "Funny," said Stuart, his brow furrowing in perplexment. "Hattie's never mentioned you to me before. I'm usually very well acquainted with all her friends."
Shelley ignored Stuart's doubtful, cynical comments by simply shrugging her shoulders and not saying a single word. Soon she was drying her drenched locks of hair in the kitchen with a large fluffy towel that Stuart had handed to her. "That's better. I feel infinitely more human," she said. Stuart directed her to the downstairs bathroom, where she quickly changed from her saturated clothes into a fresh, dry pair of jeans and a sweatshirt, and then promptly returned to Hattie's cosy country kitchen. "I really appreciate this," she said. "I hitchhiked here tonight. I was very fortunate to grab a lift with a very nice truck driver. He gave me a ride the whole way. He was making a delivery from LA to Seattle. It's 17.5 hours trip, a complete nightmare, as you can imagine. My bum is literally killing me from sitting in one position for hours at a time. It would have made so much more sense to fly. Anyway, he dropped me off a moment ago at this crazy time. I never expected to get caught up in this onslaught. It's certainly bucketing down now." She watched Stuart as he heated the milk, adding it to the hot chocolate mixture. "That looks absolutely delicious," she said. "Just what I need."
"So what do you do in Los Angeles, then?" Stuart asked to make polite conversation.
The girl giggled. "Well, I'm trying to get into acting, so I waitress to support myself, like so many hopefuls. I spent my life going to auditions, but it's a dog-eat-dog world out there. So much competition. The trouble is, in Hollywood, it's not what you know, it's who you know. It really helps to know the movers and shakers in the business, of course. I mean, there's so many talented people out there looking for a break. Sometimes they don't even get a look in. It's not about fairness at all, or even natural talent. The raw, horrifying truth is that luck plays a quintessential role on the ladder to success."
"I don't know why you put yourself through all that degrading indignity," said Stuart. "I couldn't do it myself. One chagrin disappointment after another, being rejected and spurned over and over again. That's got to be tough for anyone."
"You know, I ask myself that question all the time. Why do I bother? You're right, it's brutal. But since I was a little girl, I've always hankered and yearned to be an actress. It's always been my big dream. So I guess you just learn to develop a tough, resilient and buoyant hide. Not let it get to you when you're turned down. You have to be resolutely determined in this line of business." Stuart almost felt sorry for the Paglosian young girl, secretly thinking to himself that she was more than a little naive, impressionable and dewy-eyed. He'd heard about it all the time, young people champing at the bit to make it big in Hollywood. An ingenious jejune dream of which so many aspired to. I mean, Shelley was pretty, yes, that was true, but then so were hundreds of other Hollywood hopefuls. There was nothing about her that stood out to him as exceptionally special. She didn't have that wow X factor that you so often saw in some of the greats. But then who was he to pass comment or to judge? He didn't know a damn thing about acting. "Nice place you have here," said Shelley, looking around. Again Stuart's brow furrowed.
"You mean you've never been to Hattie's house before?"
He found this revelation more than a little bewildering. "Well, in truth, my mother was great friends with Hattie. She met her at many of the antique fairs she attends. I got to know her through my mother, you see."
"Oh, I see," said Stuart, beginning to relax. "Well, that would make a lot of sense. Hattie always goes to antique fairs. She's fascinated by vintage regalia. She knows quite a few antique dealers.
My mother says she's got quite the eye for a good collectible."
"Hattie's got lots of taste. Look around at the quality of her furnishings. But I know absolutely nothing about antiques, I have to admit."
"Oh, I can see that when I came down from the bathroom. I couldn't help but notice the vintage furniture, the contemporary artwork on the walls, the fabulous rugs on the floors. No, she's got styles and oodles of it. That's clear to see, she acknowledged warmly. Once Shelley had finished her hot chocolate, which she effusively declared with no restraint to her enthusiasm as the most delicious chocolate drink she'd ever tasted, she made no attempt to go. The rain had thankfully receded, while the wind's nagging temper had finally subsided. So Stuart looked at Shelley with expectation on his face, a look of, well, are you going to go now? But for a while she barely seemed to budge, almost as if she had no intention of moving a muscle. Finally she said with an audacious impertinence, I know I should go, but if Hattie were here she would definitely insist I stayed. I'm so exhausted after that 17 hours on the road. Getting back into a truck is a daunting prospect for me. Couldn't I just stay here until the morning? Then I'll be out of your hair, I promise you. Stuart shrugged. Very well, but only because you're a friend of Hattie's. Normally I would phone her to ask if you could stay, but I can't. You see, unfortunately Hattie cannot abide cell phones. She's on a cruise at the moment. Gave me strict instructions not to contact her, except by email, and only if it was an exceedingly urgent emergency. You see, poor old Hattie recently had her feathers rarely ruffled, on 2 separate occasions, I might add. Someone had completely raided her house, broken in, turned the place upside down. It looked like a complete pigsty. She returned home to find drawers pulled out, her settee shredded with all the stuffing spilled over the floor. Even the contents of her fridge had been ransacked. It was like someone had gone through the entire place with a fine-tooth comb. But the bizarre thing is that nothing was missing. So she's more than a little anxious, which is another reason why she wanted me to house-sit for her. She couldn't abide returning home again to that kind of chaos. So I'm naturally, well, very protective and guarded over her place, as you can understand. Stuart couldn't help noticing Shelley flush a bright pink colour, the colour of guilt. She spoke quickly, almost tripping over her words in her haste to get them out. And unambiguously so too. Who could blame you in the circumstances? How extraordinary that someone would raid her house, taking absolutely nothing. What do you think the burglars were after? That's the question Hattie would like to find answers to. It was like whoever they were strategically, prudently looking for something. But what? I cannot imagine. I mean, Hattie's reasonably well off, but she's most certainly not loaded. It is odd, agreed Shelley. Stuart led Shelley to the spare room. Make yourself comfortable. I'll see you in the morning. Thanks, Stuart, for letting me stay. I truly appreciate it a lot. Well, it's only for one night, Stuart reminded her. When Stuart retired to his bed, he found himself pondering over the unheralded, impetuous visit from this strange, mysterious young girl at the dead of night, drenched to the skin like a drowned rat. He could hardly have turned her away from his aunt's house in the rather fickle, vacillating weather, but he couldn't help thinking that the young girl's fortuitous arrival at Hattie's home out of the blue like this was more than a little odd. He knew that to send the woman out in the capricious elements again was possibly not the most chivalrous thing for him to do, but it had been a bit presumptuous, rather cheeky and impudent of her to invite herself to stay overnight like this. But then it really was late. Where could the poor girl have gone at this ungodly hour? Was she really a friend of his aunt's, he wondered. But if that was the case, why had his aunt never mentioned her to him before? In truth, she seemed innocent enough. She looked to be in her early 20s, petite with long blonde hair and blue eyes. Stuart reluctantly pulled the sheets over his body. He could feel exhaustion overwhelm him, as if the long night had sucked the energy out of him. There were the 2 lovable, familiar, lumpy forms weighing down the duvet with their ample weight. It was, of course, the cats. Stuart reached out to stroke one of them. Little Willow rolled over on his back and began to purr loudly like a steam engine. Stuart closed his eyes, drifting off into a deep sleep, soon lost in the world of his dreams. As the sunlight floated through the open part of the curtain that Stuart had failed to fully close the previous night, the whole north-facing bedroom was bathed in prisms of bright light. Stuart opened his eyes, immediately climbing out of bed to close the opening in the curtain. He was about to return to the cosy confines of his bed for a little more shut-eye when he heard a crashing and clanging sound coming from the kitchen. And then the memories of last night's unseasoned, unpremeditated guest came flooding back like a bad dream. How he wished that Shelley girl wasn't here, as it was awkward having to throw out a house guest that you instinctively sensed was eager to hang around like the proverbial bad smell. He groaned inwardly, knowing that he better check up on the visitor. By the sounds of things, she appeared to be making herself comfortably at home. Stuart threw on a pair of jeans and a sweater, straightened out the bed without upsetting the two sleeping cats, and then quickly darted down the staircase. As he entered the kitchen, he was hit with the delicious aroma of freshly baked pancakes and bacon. Shelley was at the range cooking up a big storm, giving Stuart a huge Hollywood smile, which he noticed didn't reach her blue eyes. He got the distinct impression that the girl seemed to be a little unsettled. "Hungry?" she asked. "Please sit down." Stuart obeyed while Shelley served up plates of pancakes, maple syrup and crispy bacon. She poured him a glass of fresh orange juice and sat down watching him tuck into the pancakes. "Have you not had anything to eat yourself?" he asked. "I'm not hungry. I prefer to drink coffee in the mornings." "There's no need to go to all this trouble on my account. Really there isn't," said Stuart. "However, I must compliment you on your pancakes. They're delicious. The secret is buttermilk. It makes them soft and fluffy." Stuart was inwardly squirming. This young woman was making it significantly harder for him to throw her out, now that she'd gone to so much trouble on his behalf, buttering him up with all these generous favours. "So what are your plans today? Will you be making tracks back to Los Angeles?" "That's what I wanted to talk to you about," she said impetuously. "Would it really bother you if I stayed on for a couple more days? I promise you I won't be any trouble." Stuart grimaced. He knew this would happen, but he found the words spilling out of his mouth so fast that he didn't have time to catch them. "Of course you can stay. You're welcome. Any friend of Hattie's is a friend of mine." Why the hell had he said that? The words had slipped out of his mouth so smoothly, just like melted butter, but he didn't mean a word of what he'd said. If the truth be told, he wanted to see the back of this young woman. The sooner the better. But she was making it exceedingly hard for him to turf her out, without having to employ blatantly rude tactics. Stuart spent most of the morning busying himself in the backyard, doing all kinds of yard work, like weeding, mowing the lawn, and watering some of his aunt's plant pots, while Shelley sat back on his aunt's cushioned hammock on the wraparound porch, her knees curled up tightly to her chest, and her eyes heavily engaged in a Jane Austen book. When Stuart came to sit down in the chair next to hers, he brought her an ice-cold glass of Coca-Cola, while opening up a can of beer for himself. He sighed as he took a grateful gulp. "Thirsty business, yard work. But it's invigorating exercise, let me tell you that. Aunt Hattie likes everything to be ship-shape around here." Shelley reached out for her icy-cold glass of Coca-Cola, putting her book down on the table. "I can't help noticing that hole in your fence over there. You could easily wiggle through it and go for a walk in the woods. It's a perfect shortcut. Have you ever done that before?" "Of course I've done it," said Stuart. "So has Aunt Hattie. All the time, actually. It's a beautiful wooded area through there, you know. A lot of people hike up some of those hiking trails. There's an abundance of indigenous wildlife in there. Some magnificent-looking birds. Hattie even gets deers popping through the hole there, grazing on the apples in our yard in season. She's got 5 apple trees here. That's the reason I've never closed the opening to the fence. It's a great point of access to the hiking trails." "So your aunt loves walking as well as antiques?" "Well, she likes those things too, but she likes cats and adores cruisers. I think Hattie to date has been on 14 cruises, if I'm not completely mistaken." "Yikes! That's a plethora of cruises. On the subject of antiques, I remember my mother was with Hattie when she purchased that really stunning-looking pendant. Do you know the one I'm talking about?" "I wouldn't describe it as stunning. It needed a jolly good clean. It was filthy." "Well, surely she's cleaned it up by now, our Shelley. Surely she's worn it." Stuart looked at Shelley in surprise. "Hattie doesn't wear any jewellery. She bought that pendant because she thought it might be special, once she got the grit off it. But she doesn't wear the antique she buys." "But she must have cleaned it up by now, surely."
Stuart looked at Shelley with a peculiar expression on his face. Why was this young woman continuously talking about an old pendant Hattie had purchased a long while ago? It looked like a cheap bit of junk as far as he was concerned. Shelley, quickly sensing Stuart's enigmatic, filiginous, clandestine look, was very quick to change the conversation, so they ended up talking about Seattle and the best places to eat in town, so Stuart didn't give the matter further scrutiny. That evening Shelley insisted on cooking up a storm for Stuart. "Please let me cook tonight," she begged. "It's the very least I can do in the circumstances, since you've invited me so graciously to stay." "More like you've invited yourself," thought Stuart secretly, feeling a rising level of resentment at how comfortable Shelley was making herself in his aunt's house. There was something paradoxical about her that was seriously bothering him. He wasn't sure what it was, but it was a niggling, discomposing feeling he couldn't quite shake off. By all accounts, the young woman seemed young, fresh and innocent, but Stuart was quick to discern she wasn't as squeaky clean as she appeared. That evening Shelley prepared a pasta dish with bacon. Her valiant attempts to make spaghetti carbonara were seriously lacking that oomph factor, or that je ne sais quoi, shall we say, that can take the humble spaghetti dish to the very next level. The rather drab, flavourless, insipid spaghetti was served with a vibrant crisp green salad and a large glass of Cabernet Sauvignon. Stuart barely remembered the beige, rather bland-looking meal. In a trice he began to feel very woozy, as if he was inebriated from drinking too much. He became dizzy and light-headed, and then he must have passed out. It was a long while before Stuart finally opened his eyes, to find himself on the sofa in Hattie's living room, with a comforter thrown across his body, and a pillow placed at the back of his head. There was an unfamiliar bitter taste on his tongue that he couldn't discern. He could hear a thumping sound around the living room that sounded as if someone was rifling through Hattie's stuff. He could hear two distinct voices. One was of a man. The other voice clearly belonged to Shelley.
"Well, did you get anything out of him or not?" came a man's fractious voice. "The whole idea of your staying here, Shelley, was to get some bloody information for me."
"I did try to ask him, but I didn't want to lay it on thick. It might have made me look very suspicious. I noticed his antennae were already on alert. He doesn't want me staying here. I practically had to invite myself."
"Well, what was the point of your bloody staying here if you failed to do any digging? I told you to express some interest in the pendant, to ask if you could see it. But no, you couldn't do a simple thing like that, could you? It's not rocket science, Shelley. Now we're back to square one, looking for a needle in a haystack all over again. Don't you get it, Shelley? This pendant will change our lives. It's worth a bloody fortune for us. Have you any concept what that means? Money, and lots of it."
"I did try to ask him about the pendant, I told you. He said the pendant needed cleaning. I said surely his aunt would have cleaned it by now."
"Well, what did he say?"
"He said he had no idea about things like that."
"What a bloody useless girlfriend you are, Shelley. Sometimes you have the brains of a gnat. Why did you not ask him where his aunt keeps her collectibles? We've looked in her cellar, in every cupboard here. We've already ransacked the entire place twice over, and not found a bloody thing. And our plan for you to stay here to find out answers has gone completely pear-shaped. You're bloody useless at doing anything."
Stuart was gripped with tiredness again. It was clear he had been drugged. Shelley must have put something in his wine. He wanted to fight back, but the struggle to keep his eyes open was a losing battle. He knew at once that Shelley had come into his house with guileful intent. The object of her interest was the pendant his aunt had purchased at an antiques fair of all things. It was a while later when Stuart was woken to freezing blasts of ice-cold water being poured down his face in order to wake him up. The icy coldness of the water shocked his system so fiercely out of his tranquil place of slumber that his eyes bulged out of their sockets like a gog-eyed goldfish. His head was pounding fiercely with a thundering headache. He felt sluggish, but the stinging ice-cold water was like an electric shock, jolting him wide awake. He could feel a man's hand slapping him hard across the cheeks. "Wakey, wakey, Stuart," came a man's raspy voice. Stuart realised he couldn't move his hands and feet. To his horror, he was to discover he'd been tied to his aunt's dining-room chair with rope. Stuart looked at the man in alarm. "What do you want with me?" he stammered.
The man was enormous. Every part of his body bulged with muscle. The biceps in his arms were so gargantuan they almost bubbled, accentuated further by the flimsy white string vest he was wearing. There was no doubt in Stuart's mind at all that this man spent arduous, grueling hours in the gym lifting weights to acquire the quintessential bums of steel. He was an intimidating and mean-looking man, the kind of person you would avoid sitting next to on a bus or tube at any cost. If you were a woman on her own, you would almost certainly cross over to the other side of the road if you saw the likes of him coming along. For there was something in his demeanour, the way he moved his body, the way he looked at you, that was disturbingly fierce. It rattled your cage. He was the quintessence of the perfect gangster. The man's bald head shone like a new penny. His mean eyes were piercing blue in colour. They seemed more pronounced on a face without hair. It was like they blazed out of their sockets at him, like two blue opals. But in their depths he could discern a cold iciness that was so penetrating that his vicious, foreboding stare could easily have cut glass.
"Stuart, my name is Lovell," he said, waving around a revolver in his hands, that he was not yet pointing at Stuart, but the innuendo hung in the air like a hot air balloon, warning of its imminent employment, should the need actually arise. It was like the words, "If you don't cooperate with me, I'll blow your head off," may not have been articulated or implicated, but it didn't matter, for what was left unsaid was a whole lot more efficacious. Shelley was standing at the gangster's side, as if butter wouldn't melt in her mouth. Stuart knew he should never have let that young woman into his aunt's house. This had all been a duplicitous plan from the very start. The two of them were in on this together. These were the very people who had pilferaged and plundered his aunt's house on 2 previous occasions.
"What's going on?" he asked. "What do you want?"
Stuart could feel his heart thundering in his chest. It was so incredibly loud he could hear every single beat, as clearly as you might hear the chimes on a grandfather clock.
"Nothing much, Stuart. Nothing much," repeated Lovell. "Nothing to worry your pretty head about, Stuart. On the contrary, we'll be out of your hair if you cooperate with us. We would like to know where your aunt keeps the pendant she brought from the antiques fair."
"I don't know where it is," said Stuart.
"That's not good enough, Stuart. For one, I don't believe you," he said with a nasty snigger on his face. "And two, I'm not a bloody idiot. I'm not about to buy into your crap. You know where your aunt keeps her collectibles. Where are they?"
"I told you, I don't know. I really don't know." The obnoxious looks Lovell was giving Stuart caused the 30-year-old to tremble in his boots, for the belligerent, capricious man seemed unhinged and exceedingly dangerous. Stuart could feel the icy-cold feel of the revolver being prized against his temple. He flinched.
"Are you insane? You can't go pointing a rifle at me, or tying me up like this. I told you I don't know where it is. Why would I know something like that? I haven't got the slightest interest in any antique."
"Stuart," whispered Shelley, "try and think where it is, will you? Lovell will rarely beat you up if you don't."
"Shelley's right, Stuart. Not only will I beat you up within an inch of your life, but after I've done so, I will unload this revolver in your head, blow your brains away. And I'm not joking either. So start talking now, 'cause time is running out for you very fast, my man. And I'm not very patient."
"I told you, I don't know."
"Is that right, Stuart?" said Lovell, his raspy voice becoming enraged. "Is that bloody right?" he said, punching Stuart so hard in the face he could feel his front tooth crumble and break in his mouth, while trickles of blood seeped down his nose, splashing over his white shirt, bespeckling them in spatters of blood. He could taste the metallic taste of blood on his tongue. Then Stuart felt a big leather boot pounding in his guts. He recoiled in pain, raising his hands. All right, please, stop. I'll tell you what you need to know. I'll tell you where to find the pendant, but stop, please stop." "There's a good boy," said Lovell, purring like a Cheshire cat. "I told you it's so much easier when you cooperate." Stuart pointed to the bookshelf in the living room. "There's a lever on the side. It opens out into a secret room."
Lovell pressed the lever down. The bookcase creaked open like a door to reveal a hidden room, filled with boxes piled high on top of each other. Lovell audibly gasped. He stared at the incredible sizable antiques collectibles in Aunt Hattie's secret space.
Now that's more like it. I told you there was a place she would keep her secret stash.
Stuart could hear Lovell and Shelley searching through his aunt's stuff, opening up boxes and scrabbling through them to search for the locket. It would take them hours to get through all the stuff, he thought. His arms were already aching from being tied up so hard. "You're going to let Stuart go, aren't you, Lovell? Once we've found the locket," he heard Shelley ask the man. Stuart could hear the uncertainty in her voice, as if she doubted Lovell's integrity. Perhaps deep down in her gut, she discerned that her irresolute, ambivalent boyfriend would go beyond the bounds of what is deemed as acceptable to safeguard his own skin.
"Are you kidding, Shelley? Once I've found the locket, it's a bullet in the head for him. I can't afford to have him identify me, can I? We'll stage the place to look like an armed robbery. No one will suspect a bloody thing."
"But you can't kill him," said Shelley. "That's murder, Lovell. You can't do that."
"I'll do as I damned well like."
Shelley crept out of the secret room. She came over to Stuart, putting her finger to her mouth. "I'm going to untie you," she whispered. "When you get the chance, you must escape. Go and hide in the woods. He's going to try and kill you, but bide your time. Wait until he's distracted, or he'll be on to your game." Shelley quickly untied Stuart. Stuart whispered, "Thanks," and continued to remain on the chair, waiting for the perfect moment to flee from the house. Lovell's voice could be heard.
"Shelley, where are you? I've only bloody gone and found it."
Stuart watched as Lovell brought out the unpretentious-looking locket.
"This must be it," he said,
his voice sounding euphoric.
"Go and get me some cleaning products from the kitchen, will you, Shelley?"
Stuart watched Lovell polishing up the locket, with an expression of extreme annoyance creeping up on his face.
"It looks like bloody glass, doesn't it?" he said to Shelley,
taking out a newspaper article from his pocket and comparing the picture of the locket in the article to the one that he had in his hands.
"It's the very same locket, but this one is definitely glass. Read the article again to me, Shelley. Maybe I've missed something here."
"An unlikely lottery win of a different kind," read Shelley. "A locket belonging to Lady Penelope Grey, who resides in the town of North Berwick, East Lothian in Scotland, was recently sold at a very standard antiques fair at Clayson Farm Antique Show in Central Washington State Fairgrounds by her grandson, who lives in Washington, and was disposing of some of his grandmother's antiques. It is rumoured that the locket is worth millions of dollars. On the surface it is described as a mundane-looking piece that is unlikely to grab your attention, but there is more to the piece than meets the eye. Whoever finds the locket, Lady Penelope Grey claims their lives will be forever changed, for the pink diamond it contains is one of a kind. When Lady Penelope was asked whether she would expect the locket back, she said certainly not. It was sold accidentally when my grandson was cleaning out some of my old antiques, so as far as I'm concerned, whoever buys the pendant, well, it belongs to them. It is serendipitous that it ended up in their hands. I wish them lots of luck in the future."
"This must be it," said Lovell, cleaning the jewel rigorously and comparing it to the locket in the picture. "It's one and the same, but this isn't pink, it's opaque. No wonder the grandson threw it out. It definitely looks like glass."
"But the article says on the surface the locket is mundane. This looks mundane on the surface, doesn't it?" said Shelley. "But it says the stone it contains. Notice the word contains. Maybe the stone is inside the locket. Maybe there's a secret lever that opens up, much like the bookcase did. It looks like it could contain something, doesn't it? It's very thick on all its sides. Perhaps the stone is inside the locket."
"Good thinking," said Lovell.
He began to rigorously press the sides of the pendant. It suddenly popped open like a jewellery box, and inside the locket was the most exquisite pink diamond that glittered and sparkled as it hit the light. One look at that sparkling stone. You knew it was worth an absolute fortune.
"This is it," said Lovell. "This is the precious diamond. It's worth a bloody fortune. I'm bloody rich," he said. "I'm bloody rich."
Lovell's eyes filled with greed, while his jaw jiggled with enthusiasm. Shelley looked exceedingly annoyed. "Correction! You mean we're bloody rich."
"Correction! I mean I'm bloody rich, Shelley," said Lovell, pointing the revolver directly at her. "What did you think I am, Shelley? A complete, total and utter mug? Did you really think that I was going to share my vast fortune with you? Are you kidding? Not a chance. But I was the one that recognised the pendant in the paper. Without my input, you would have known nothing about it at all. Do you really think I give a damn about that, Shelley? You know your problem, little Shelley, is you're easily duped. It's so easy to pull the wool over your eyes. You're very naive. But you said you loved me, said Shelley, her eyes filling with tears. I did this all for you, for us. I didn't want any of this. I stuck my neck out on the line for you. Lovell scoffed his vindictive smile, which turned downwards into a scowl. I would say anything, wouldn't I, to get my hands on the loot? But why would I be interested in a girl like you, Shelley? You're nothing to me, he said, spitting on the ground with disgust. Absolutely nothing. Do you think I have respect for a girl who throws herself at me like a cheap tart? So what are you going to do, then? Are you going to kill me too? Asked Shelley. You took the words out of my mouth, Sunshine Girl, said Lovell, raising his revolver, pulling back the trigger and shooting Shelley in the chest with one mighty blow. The expression on his face was indifferent and apathetic, the noise ear-piercingly loud. Shelley fell back on the ground with an almighty thump. Blood spurted out of the wound on her shirt. It was so surreal that for a moment Stuart thought he had to be dreaming. Surely this was not really happening. This sort of thing happened in the movies, not in real life. Shelley's eyes seemed to glaze over. Her body became motionless and unmoving. Stuart's stomach went as cold as ice. He knew it was his turn next to have a bullet unloaded in his head, but he was no longer restrained by the rope that Shelley had untied for him. In a trice, with the athletic prowess and grace of a cheetah, he leapt quickly from the chair. The jerking, swift action took Lovell off guard. Stuart bolted through the house at one hell of a speed, hearing a couple of bullets being lambasted behind him. His heart was thundering violently in his chest. His fingers were trembling and shaking as he hurriedly opened the door. His fingers so wet and clammy, they slipped on the doorknob, but he managed to turn it and open the door hurriedly. Where he raced out into the dark night, Stuart made a beeline for the opening in the fence, running so fast it felt as if his legs had been hardwired for speed due to the adrenaline surging through his veins, giving him that quintessential edge. In his gut, Stuart knew the woods were the safest place for him to take cover. It was a tenebrous night, but the soft silvery shadows of the moon danced through the darkened firmament, blowing enough kisses of ethereal light for Stuart to see his way very clearly. A fragrant cool breeze blew against his cheeks as he entered the wood grove. The tall Douglas fir trees gathered together in towering groups, like tall, slender giants, penciling into the sky like dense skyscrapers. Their verdant boughs were swaying ominously in the breeze, giving the woods an ethereal, spectral impression. For on this night the sounds of the crickets chirping, the frogs croaking was absent, as if they were boycotting the woods tonight, refusing to play their reassuring notes, to envelop the forest with the sense of stability and security that Stuart craved. For silence had a dreadful, inauspicious, portentous sound all of its own. It was unduly heightened this night by the sounds of Lovell's heavy rubber boots trailing behind him. Stuart realised that Lovell might be a beefcake in every regard, but he was not a fast runner, which was where he had the distinct, definite edge. Stuart ran to take cover behind a large tree, where he fiddled around in his back pockets for a cell phone so he could quickly call the police. But his cell phone was missing. Of course he should have realised that Lovell would have removed his cell phone from him before he'd tied him up, when he was so drugged that he hadn't been aware of a single thing. Lovell was getting close to him. He could hear the man's heavy breathing, the crackle of bark and leaf litter popping under his shoes like popcorn. He was out of breath, but searching around the woodgrove for any signs of Stuart, knowing he couldn't have gone far in the dark. I know you're here, Stuart. I'm not leaving until I put a bullet through your head. I'm not stupid enough to leave any evidence behind me. That's a classic mistake most criminals make. You know what they say about secrets, Stuart? You share them with no one, so no one betrays you. My dad taught me that lesson, Stuart, so I'm not leaving the woods until you come out. I know you're around here, somewhere. You can make it hard for yourself, but you're going to delay the inevitable, 'cause you're not getting out here alive, mate. If I have to wait here until the first light of the morning, I most certainly will. I'm not going anywhere, Stuart, just so you know. Stuart clung to the side of the tree like an oyster on a rock, trying desperately not to move a muscle or to even breathe. He was afraid, amidst the baleful sound of silence, that Lovell would be able to hear his own heart racing through his chest. All of a sudden there was a strange roaring sound in the woodgrove, unlike anything that Stuart had ever heard before. It sounded not unsimilar to a lion's roar. The first thought that came to his mind was that a mountain lion was loitering around. No wonder the forest was steeped in silence. He could see that Lovell's face looked a little discomposed, as if he was focusing his revolver on the noise. Then there was the sound of heavy feet moving through the trees. They did not sound like the feet of a nimble mountain cat, but something substantial, of great might and girth and weight. Whatever it was appeared to be breaking tree limbs, shaking branches, moving ever closer, getting ever nearer. It was like the forest seemed to groan and shake under its impending weight. "Nice try, Stuart. You think you can scare me, mate. I'm not easily fooled, you know. I'm going to find you." Then suddenly, thundering through the trees at one hell of a speed, and standing up straight and tall, yards away from Lovell, was the most enormous creature Stuart had ever seen in his entire life. The revelation hit him hard like a brick to the head, as he peered at the prescient creature behind the tree where he was hiding. "Oh my God, it's a Bigfoot," he thought. The moonlight danced through the trees. Its soft shaft seemed to cascade over the Bigfoot in a shimmering light that seemed to highlight the ends of the Bigfoot's hair. Stuart surmised it was easily over 8 foot tall, about 700 pounds, with overlong arms, and an incredible body covered in long flowing hair. But the size of this thing was gargantuan. It possessed a cone-shaped head and a remarkably human face, with deep-set dark eyes that gave off a menacing, very disturbing red eyeshine. At first Lovell was so confounded to see the Bigfoot that his mouth dropped open in astonishment. His eyes widened. His body trembled. It would seem that at first the Bigfoot was as bewildered to see Lovell as he was indeed to see the Bigfoot. For a moment they stared at each other incredulously. Stuart marvelled how this human beefcake looked like a tiny doll next to the giant-like creature, whom overshadowed him in size, girth, and weight. Lovell pointed his revolver at the creature, but he was shaking so much that the revolver was wobbling precariously in his hands. He tried to run backwards in the woods, keeping his revolver pinned on the Bigfoot, making the classic mistake of unloading one of his bullets in the Bigfoot's direction. But the bullet brushed past the Bigfoot's long hair and went gliding directly into a tree trunk, where it parked its metal cylinder deep within the trunk. The creature growled. It pulled back its thin lips to expose its human-like teeth, for it was in no doubt that Lovell had attempted to kill it. Now it wanted revenge. Stuart's first impression of the Bigfoot was it had been a benevolent, easy-going sort of guy. He was sure that if Lovell had not reacted so adversely towards the creature, he would have been left unscathed. But now the Bigfoot was angry, very, very angry. Stuart could feel the energy of its indignation and fury. The creature seized the revolver from Lovell's hands, throwing it into the forest, where it landed with a thud in some obscure place, possibly now hidden by the shrubbery and ferns. The creature then grabbed Lovell with his overlong arm. Lovell was fighting back with all his might, but his attempts to escape were pathetic. The Bigfoot picked Lovell up by the waist, turned him upside down, so he was dangling by his legs. He pummelled him against the tree so forcefully that you could hear every bone in the big man's body just break and crack, and then he fell flat on the ground, his body completely lifeless. The Bigfoot stood over Lovell's body, testing it with his feet to ensure he wasn't actually moving. He seemed fully satisfied that Lovell was really dead. That was when he noticed Lovell was wearing a locket around his neck. He studied it curiously, pulling it off his neck hard, and then examining it with his thick sausage-sized fingers. The locket naturally opened, revealing the sparkling pink diamond. The Bigfoot audibly gasped. He threw the pendant on the ground, making a happy whooping sound, as he glided through the forest with the precious stone in his hands. To cut a long story short, I'm delighted to inform you that Shelley had pretended to be dead when her boyfriend shot her through the chest, realising that if she didn't, he would continue to shoot her until he was absolutely certain she was a goner. Luckily, the gunshot had missed any major arteries, And given the next-door neighbours heard the gunshot going off, the emergency services were called immediately to the house. They were able to stabilise Shelley, who revealed that her boyfriend had shot her at point-blank range and then run away. When Stuart visited Shelley in hospital, they both firmly decided not to elaborate to the police on any of the finer details in regards to their story, which meant Stuart would not mention the locket. Shelley apologised to Stuart profusely for setting him up, claiming that she was so blindsided by her love for Lovell that she had gone along with his insidious plan, even though she hadn't agreed with it. It was true that she had known Hattie through her mother, and recognised the locket in the newspaper. She had made the mistake of mentioning it to Lovell, who had devised a nefarious plan to get his hands on the jewel, but she had no idea that Lovell's plan would turn so murderous. I never realised quite how wicked he was. I'm so sorry, Stuart. I really am. I would have done anything for Lovell, but I draw the line at murder. I'm sorry for everything I did.
That's all right, said Stuart. I forgive you.
Stuart kept his mouth shut about the Bigfoot he'd encountered, and surreptitiously fixed the hole in Hattie's fence. It was a long while before the bones of Lewis were finally discovered in the woodgrove, but the manner of which he had died remained a mystery. Stuart returned Hattie's locket to the secret room behind the bookshelf, so she was none the wiser about the havoc the simple item of jewellery had created. He was secretly rather relieved the Bigfoot was now in ownership of the precious jewel, for he knew without a shadow of a doubt that that kind of money could incite a great deal of evil, as let's not kid, he nearly lost his life over that locket. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is Noah and I'm from Seattle, and my Bigfoot encounter happened in 1983 when I was 16 years old at the time. Growing up, my family lived in a high-rise, attractive upmarket apartment block in downtown Seattle that was sumptuously decorated with stunning upholstered furnishings, interesting eclectic art pieces, and cosy, vibrantly rich Persian rugs. The huge seamless glass windows in every room of the apartment overlooked stunning cosmopolitan views over Seattle. I would often stand out on the balcony and watch the world go by on the buzzing streets below. I would observe horns beeping and people bustling across the streets, hurrying and doing their level bests to get to work on time. I often wondered what excuse they'd give their boss this morning for arriving late. Sometimes I would hear loud disputes and raised voices on the street corners as two people argued over a parking spot. And I would watch people lining up at the baker's to buy their favourite breakfast bagels. Even from our apartment block, I kid you not, I could smell that delicious baked bread from the delectable bakery across the road that was subtly reminding all the passing pedestrians that coffee and cinnamon bagels might be just what the doctor ordered for a hectically busy Monday morning. The streets were vibrant and colourfully alive with the energy of a very bustly, busy city, and as an onlooker I found it fascinating to observe the lively activity of this thriving metropolis. I was raised by my two parents, who were both professionals in the city, and so there were many times when I returned home from school that I was left all to my own devices. It was at times like these that I longed to have a brother or sister, because hanging out all on your own could be incredibly lonely. I always envied larger families who had brothers and sisters, because I falsely believed that every family was as cosy and companionable as the Waltons, but I was to discover in later years that this most certainly was not the case. I soon learnt to entertain myself when my parents were busy out working, and I became very adept and proficient at being on my own. We did not have the technology that people have today, like cell phones and tablets, but looking back, I don't believe we missed out of any of that. Life in the 80s was, I believe, much more easygoing than it is now, and in those days I rarely believe we knew how to take life in our stride, and I don't think I'm looking through rose-coloured spectacles. I remember I would sit back at the desk in my bedroom, listening to the radio whilst doing my homework, listening to the music of the day beating in the background. I say this without bias or prejudice, but the 80s music was without doubt the best music of all generations. The lyrics were utterly outstanding and the artists phenomenally talented, and so it was a wonderful time to be young. Both my parents were very congenial people, but they were quietly reserved, and found it exceedingly difficult to express or communicate their emotions, either physically or emotionally. But despite everything, I knew that they really loved me. They did little things like expressing their loves in ways like taking me shopping to buy my favourite sneakers or treating me to a milkshake at my favourite cafe. My mother was like a female doe who possessed a very protective, serene nature and a very gentle spirit, while my dad was like a very big black and white panda bear, lovable, gentle, and exceedingly elusive. As a young boy, I sailed through school. I was one of those very irritating types that people just love to hate, because I'd always get straight A's without even breaking a sweat. I was exceptionally good with science and math. It was not long before I was offering my services to tutor other kids who were invariably struggling with their grades. On one occasion, when I was about 16 years old, I was tutoring a little boy called Daniel Dexter, who was a really cute little kid of about 12 years old, who had been battling with his math homework and failing miserably at school. Dr. Dexter, his father, was very concerned about his son's poor progress at school and his son's tumultuous challenges with numbers, and so he actually paid me handsomely to tutor his own son after school hours, which I did diligently, and I heartily enjoyed. It was not long before Daniel was acquiring excellent grades in math, and Dr. Dexter was exceedingly grateful to me for the proficient tuition that had turned around his son's poor performance at school. I was blown away when he literally handed me a wad of cash to thank me, which he took out of his trouser pocket, which I thought was exceedingly generous of him. He also told me that at any time that I should require a holiday, that I was more than welcome to stay at his holiday home on the Oregon coast. He told me he had 2 Latino ladies who cleaned and maintained the property for his whole family. "You'll be treated like a king when you go there, because they'll pander to your every need and cook you anything you like. You should invite a friend to go with you, because the place is breathtakingly beautiful, and you'll have a whale of a time. And better still, I'll cover all the costs for you." I was absolutely amazed at this generous offer, and I assured him that I would accept it when the summer holiday came about, which is invariably exactly what I did. So when my school holidays did finally approach, I accepted Dr. Dexter's kind offer and subsequently invited my best friend Donovan to stay with me at Dr. Dexter's holiday home on the Oregon coast. Unfortunately, it would seem that Donovan would only be able to join me at the house 3 days later, as there was a family reunion that he needed to attend first. I scribbled down Dr. Dexter's address for him and handed it over and told him that I'd see him in a few days, and that was settled. As the taxi driver took me down the long windy coastal road, where I observed the most exquisite postcard-perfect beachfront homes, obviously owned by people who were not short of a bob or two, the driver asked me what their number of the property actually was. "It says here," I said, extracting a note from my wallet, "the property number is 78, but apparently the sign is a bit damaged. But Dr. Dexter said I will definitely know the house because it's a distinctive red front door." "Oh, here it is," said the taxi driver, stopping outside an exquisite-looking home with a rather grand-looking red front door. "It says this is number 73, but I think it's number 78. I believe the edges of the 8 have been worn away by natural erosion, making it look like a 3 when it's really an 8. It's the sea air down here," he said. "It can cause no end of rust on signs, and it's easy to get confused by weathered numbers. Happens all the time in this part of the world." Thankfully, I got out of the taxi, tipped the taxi driver very generously, and gathered my suitcase and my belongings and made my way to the gleaming red front door, which I noticed, to my surprise, was slightly ajar. I pushed the door open and walked into the house, placing my suitcase in the entrance hall while I surveyed the magnificently sumptuous, lavishly appointed home, where no expense had been spared, as every room in the entire house was exquisitely turned out, with stunning marble floors, sweeping staircases, and huge picture windows throughout. It would appear that every single bedroom seemed to have its own bathroom en suite, and a balcony or patio that overlooked the most panoramic views of the breathtaking blue ocean. I could smell the salty sea air and even taste it on my lips, and I felt incredibly excited to be staying in such a lavishly opulent but very stylish home. Wait until Donovan sees all this, I thought to myself happily. I knew he appreciated the finer things in life, and Mr. Dexter's grand holiday home most certainly ticked all the boxes. It was high living indeed, and who did not fancy a bit of luxury from time to time? And even at 16 years old, I could really appreciate it. I made my way down the large ornate staircase past some pretentious, very grandiose living spaces with superbly upholstered furnishings, gleaming oakwood antiques, and impressive fireplaces, not to mention interesting artworks, until I reached the enormous state-of-the-art gourmet kitchen. I was literally surrounded by a sea of granite and smart white wooden cabinets, not to mention gleaming French ovens with hundreds of gas hobs. Suddenly I noticed that there were two Latino women sharing a chuckle together as they cleaned down the large granite surfaces with a shiny buff. I remember secretly thinking to myself that it was impossible to make that gleaming work surface even more shiny. "Oh, there you are," I said to the two ladies. "I'm Noah. I've heard so much about you both." The two women looked up at me in surprise, and their eyes grew as wide as saucers, almost as if they were wondering who on earth I actually was. They both looked at each other with a strange, perturbed, rather confused-looking expressions on their faces, while they smiled at me very politely. I opened one of the large refrigerators and helped myself to a large can of Mountain Dew and proceeded to drink it, while the two Latino women gawked at me with shocked looks on their faces. "Sorry," I said. "Forgive me for being so rude, but I'm dying of thirst. What are your names?" "I'm Lydia, and this is Anna," said the lady, smiling at me awkwardly and studying me with a curious interest. "So good to meet you both. I've heard about your delectable cooking. I can't wait to taste your cuisine. I gather you're an amazing cook." Anna looked animated. "The boss told you that they loved my cooking," she said, looking suddenly very happy. "I only wish they'd tell me that themselves, because I never know if they actually enjoy my food." "Well, you know now," I said. I continued, "I can see by your expressions that you're not expecting me. But not to worry, it's all legit. I was cordially invited by the boss himself," I joked. "Of course you were," said Anna, beaming brightly, "and you're very welcome here." I proceeded to tell the ladies where I'd be sleeping that night. I'd chosen a room on the top floor, which was really, really beautiful, and it overlooked the ocean and possessed enormous glass sliding doors that opened out onto an expansive patio. On one side of the patio was a fire escape stairwell, which you could actually use to access the beach from your bedroom, which I thought was a first-class shortcut to the beach. I informed the kindly Latino ladies to expect another guest shortly, because my friend would be joining me in 3 days' time. So then, dressed in my swimming trunks and carrying a surfboard under my arm that I discovered in one of the bedrooms, I hastily bustled towards the beach, which was quite literally 100 yards away from the house. I found myself racing jubilantly down these smart white wooden steps that bridged the rocky alcove. When I finally reached the bottom step, I was invariably standing on this long expanse of beautiful golden beach that literally stretched back for many miles. It was quite possibly the most exquisite scenery that I've ever enjoyed in my entire life. All the stunning oceanfront homes appeared to be built on a high hilly elevation that was composed of masterful-looking rocks and dotted by ubiquitous tall evergreen firs that stretched out into personalised, individualised, charming gardens. The panoramic views over the rolling blue ocean with its impressive high breakers were totally enchanting. I also enjoyed admiring the masterful pieces of rockery that looked like great works of natural sculpture that jutted out into areas of the ocean. I knew that rockery was the perfect spot to locate those quaint little charming rock pools filled with all kinds of curiously interesting sea life, like sea anemones, starfish, and you name it. I loved the way the waves would crash against the rocks, forming bountiful foaming white bubbles, and the sound of the ocean waves was quite exhilarating and extraordinary. I glided eagerly towards the surf, drinking in the smell of the fresh salty sea air, and enjoying the feeling of the soft breeze blowing against my skin. As I ran, Clouds of soft beach sand enveloped my feet, and as I reached the surf, it was wonderful feeling my feet getting drenched by the cool water of the ocean. Armed with my surfboard tucked under one of my arms, I moved ever forwards into the surf, gliding into the deeper water, where I bravely embarked on tackling a few of those challenging waves with my surfboard, with what I might say was a small degree of success. I was lucky to have been taught to surf by a professional instructor once, when I was as young as 12, so I was quite fluent with the whole surfing protocol and considered myself an above-average surfer. How long I was out there in the salty blue foaming water, I have absolutely no idea, because time seemed to stand so still. I was having that much fun, and I was in my element embracing those incredible waves. There wasn't a solitary soul around, and the entire beach was all to myself, so I was in heaven. By the time I'd finished surfing, I was aching in places I didn't even know I had muscles. I wearily made my way back to the house, and in the process I possibly brought the entire beach back with me, because there were sand trails everywhere, so poor Anna certainly had her work cut out, cleaning after the likes of me. Anna and Lydia attended to my every need, fussing over me like a distinguished guest, giving me the house keys and making me some incredible dishes, including the most incredibly sumptuous homemade pizza and a double thick chocolate milkshake, so there were times I quite literally thought I'd died and gone to heaven, and Anna and Lydia were angels without wings. "Who taught you to cook?" I asked Anna, who was blushing furiously with my passionate enthusiasm over her outrageously good food. "You should be running your own restaurant, not working for the boss." "Maybe one day," she said, with a longing look on her face. After 3 days had passed, I was surprised to see that Donovan had not arrived at the holiday home yet. But as we did not have cell phones in those days, and I didn't know what number to call him on, I decided to just let sleeping dogs lie. Maybe something had delayed his trip to the coast, and the family reunion had gone on longer than he had anticipated. That was very possible, I thought. That night I went to bed, aching all over from 3 days on the beach, overexerting myself on the surfboard. So that night I invariably found it very difficult to get to sleep, because of the inevitable aches and pains that were kind of keeping me awake. But I did manage to fall asleep, and I was awoken to the sound of raised, excitable voices in the house, expressing their fervent delight to be home. As I was partially asleep, I thought the animated, shrill voices were all part of my dream, until I suddenly heard feet racing up the staircase and rushing towards my bedroom. Suddenly I looked up from my pillow to see a young 8-year-old girl studying me with a bewildered look on her face, and then she turned around and dashed downstairs. I heard her saying, "Daddy, there's a strange, horrible man lying in my bed." Then I could hear the father saying, "What, are you sure?" I then heard the ominous sound of the man loading his firearm and telling his wife that the house had been burgled and the perpetrator was still in the house. "Call the police at once," he told his wife, "and I'll deal with the intruder." Wasting no time for idle speculation, I quickly grabbed my wallet and raced down the fire escape towards the white steps, down to the beach, wearing only a pair of boxer shorts, but it could have been a whole lot worse. I could have been absolutely wearing nothing. As I reached the beach, I had a startling revelation, and it hit me like a brick in the face. I'd been staying at the wrong house all this time, eating their food, ordering their cleaners around, and helping myself to all and sundry. It all made perfect sense now. I recalled the shocked looks on Anna's and Lydia's faces as I'd barged into the kitchen and helped myself to a drink as if I'd owned the place. I thought about the fact that Donovan had not turned up, but that was possibly because he was actually staying at the right house. Then there was the taxi ride to the house, and that we thought the 8 had been weathered away to create a 3, but maybe the house that I'd been staying at was 73 and not the 78 that I was actually looking for. All these thoughts were invariably shooting up in my head like fireworks taking off. I noticed that there were blue lights flashing in the distance, and I realised in horror that the police had actually been called to the house. So I scurried away as quickly as I could, climbing over several rocky outcrops, running from one private beach to another, until finally I found a private beach which was a little bit more cut off, where I felt safe, and where I found a place to sleep on the soft sea sand. I awoke later that night to feel something scuttling and crawling over my body, and I discovered it was a big crab, so I pushed it to one side. I stood up for a while and I glanced towards the beach, and then I noticed that the entire beach was literally crawling with large crabs that seemed to emerge from the surf from nowhere. They were the kinds of crabs every gourmet chef would want to serve up in their restaurant, and there were hundreds of these things, and they were big. I glanced at my watch and it was about 2 a.m. in the morning, and then to my amazement I saw the torso of a very large man sitting on the beach. I realised that this man was a very stocky build because his shoulders were absolutely enormous and his chest was easily 4 foot across. My first thought was that this man was some kind of extreme bodybuilder, but what on earth was he doing sitting on the beach at this time of the morning? Had he had a raucous row with his wife, I wondered, over his obsession with bodybuilding, and he was seeking refuge on the beach to calm down his frazzled nerves? Even sitting down, this man was exceedingly tall, and I was curious about him, so I decided to sneak behind the rocks that were yards away from where he was sitting to get a better view of him. I think secretly I was rather impressed by the size of him, and I wanted to see what his rack looked like. Luckily it was a full moon that night, so visibility was excellent, and the outside lights of the oceanfront house also gave phenomenal illumination. As I ventured ever closer, I realised that this strange man was covered in long dark hair, and then I observed that this was not a man at all. But what was it? I couldn't imagine. It looked like a man, but it also looked like an ape, almost as if they were rolled together. My attention was drawn to what this creature was actually doing. I noticed it was sitting on the sandy bank of the beach, breaking open these crabs with his nimble, strong, large, sausage-sized fingers, and eating the contents which he sucked out of the shell. He must have eaten dozens of crabs, because there was a huge pile of these broken shells standing by his side, layered on top of each other. This creature sat on the soft beach sand and appeared to be watching the waves crashing against the rocks, and I believe he was actually appreciating the view. I really got the impression that he was definitely enjoying himself. After the creature had eaten his fill, he rubbed his stomach appreciatively and finally stood up and began to lift his arms to the sky and reach out for a huge stretch. When he did this, I nearly fainted because I never anticipated the creature being this incredibly tall. I promise you he was easily over 10 foot and 1,000 pounds. I don't think any man could be this big, and despite the long flowing hair covering his torso, not to mention his entire body, I'm willing to bet that he had the most phenomenal rack. He was such an impressive-looking creature, majestic, agile, athletic and lofty, and although he was incredibly intimidating, I did not feel a moment of fear. I noticed that every area of this critter's body bulged with muscle, and he had very impressive strong legs, and his arms were so long he could have easily touched the ground without bending over. The critter glided towards the surf, and I could observe what looked like a brown rock bobbing up and down between the waves, but he swam with such effortless ease, and the massive breakers were no obstacle for him to overcome. The creature glided out of the water and shook his coat of long black shaggy hair, much like a long-haired dog does when he emerges from the surf. It was then that I noticed the cone-shaped head, the long angular face, the very distinct prominent brow ridge, and the deep-set eyes that seemed to possess a red shine in the darkness. I was in total awe of this creature as I watched it glide away, and I remember wondering what on earth it was, and I knew instinctively if I told anyone what I'd observed, they would tell me that I'd been drinking way too much moonshine. At first light the following morning I began to look for house number 78, and as I knocked on the bright red door, it was opened by my best friend Donovan. "What happened to you?" he asked. "When I arrived here you were nowhere to be seen." He looked at me in absolute horror, standing there in the doorway in my boxer shorts, half naked in the early morning light. "I've been sleeping in the wrong house," I told him. Donovan gasped, with his hands cupping his mouth in astonishment. "Yes," I said, "I walked into a stranger's house and was waited on hand and foot by their Latino staff for 3 long days, only to discover in the middle of the night that I was actually sleeping in the wrong house when the kid discovered me sleeping in her bed, and the family finally called the police, so I did a runner before I got caught." As Donovan looked at me, he cracked up laughing. Only you could end up embroiled in such a mess. Lucky for your parents they didn't answer the phone when I called their house after I arrived here, because I didn't know where on earth you were. Because you couldn't be seen anywhere. You would have had everyone searching for you by now, and worried that you'd been abducted by aliens, he teased. To cut a long story short, I never returned to house number 73 to retrieve my suitcase or the rest of my belongings. For the rest of the holiday I actually borrowed Donovan's clothes, and we had a fabulous time spent on Dr. Dexter's beautiful oceanfront home, which, although stunningly luxurious, was not nearly as lavish as the former house that I'd stayed in, and the Latino staff were not nearly as accommodating as Anna and Lydia had been, nor were they as exceptionally good at cooking like Anna invariably was. Years later I told Dr. Dexter what actually transpired to me when I went to stay at his home, and he recalls actually going to a dinner party in Oregon where one of the guests talked about a strange visitor who had moved into their holiday home and helped himself to everything while his family was away. The cheek of it, he had said. The man clearly wanted a free holiday at my expense, and just barged into my property as if he owned the place. My little girl discovered the man sleeping in her bed, and he made a hasty retreat down our fire escape so that the police never caught up with him. The brazen audacity of some people just boggles the mind. Several years ago I went to a delicious Latino restaurant in Oregon and was escorted to my table by a very familiar face. It was Anna, the Latino, who had waited on me hand and foot in that stranger's home. Believe it or not, she said that I was the best uninvited guest that she'd ever waited on, and she said my appreciation of her food had made her all the more determined to run her own restaurant one day. So she gave our family our meal on the house. So it's a very small world indeed. Years later, due to television and the internet, I was to discover that the critter that I saw stuffing his face with crabs on the beach was indeed a Bigfoot, and it was worth all that incredible drama just to encounter the hairy humanoid. So there you are. That is my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.